right, people, time for another feedback session here on Flight Chat. Obviously, a lot of thoughts with respect to Peacemaker and a number of other things, in addition to a little bit of sports chatter. Not quite as much as we had last week, but a little bit of sports chatter here and there because, well, some unexpected things occurred with respect to the baseball playoffs. Some really unexpected things in that regard, and also adding a little bit of an extra vibe to it that I'd completely forgotten about because we have a longtime listener that has chimed in before that is returning today for an email. But hey, let's, without further ado, dive right into it. And we begin, of course, with John R. batting leadoff today. He's got a pair of emails. Actually, he's got three emails, but two of them are written. One of them is a companion image. But here, let's start with his first email that he sent a couple of days ago on October 1st. This one is titled, Go Green Ranger Go plus questions. He says, I ordered a full-on helmet and dragon flute this time so I can pull off a costume contest on October 25th. Yes, one is a lightsaber I built at Disneyland. Oh, they have that? Yes, that's right. They do have. I keep forgetting, because here's the thing, right? Like, obviously, I want to go to Galaxy's Edge, right? And I keep forgetting, like, all the videos and whatnot that I've seen has been of Galaxy's Edge at Disney World in Florida, right? And I keep forgetting that there is absolutely a full-fledged Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland in California. And why would I go to the one in California when I go to the one in Florida? Well, I just recently was in California, and California is pretty awesome. And yeah, I mean, as a state, I tend to like California better than Florida at this point. I can now officially say that I've been to both states. I mean, California is a massive state, and Florida is not like necessarily a tiny state, but there's a lot of places in Florida I haven't been. I've only been to Orlando. I've only been to where Disney World is. And I'm told I should only go to Disney World when it comes to Florida. But California, a little bit different. Disneyland is in Anaheim. But let's see. Yeah, for you, John, that's got to be what, driving distance? But here, you sent a TikTok video, and it does look like a cool costume. I think you've definitely achieved the Green Ranger look, and I like the addition of the dragon flute. You're talking about the difference in the masks. Oh, okay. This second one, Green Ranger, a Jedi. Okay, all right. I see. And I see the lightsaber that you got. You said that's the one that you made? Did they? Because that looks like an extendo one. That looks like one of the ones with the extendo blades. Can you make those at Disneyland, or do you have a different one? I don't know. I'm not sure how that works because I know they have the real expensive like light up ones, right? And that's like the $200 ones. Like that's the one that I truly want. You can build those at Disneyland too, right? I sure hope so because I would love to be able to build one of those. Yes, I know how much it is, but listen, for a Star Wars junkie, it's completely worth it. But John says, I can understand the appeal because I did say that I prefer the White Ranger over the Green Ranger myself personally, as far as Tommy is concerned. He says, I can understand the appeal of preferring the White Ranger. My biggest motive for being the Green Ranger, though, he says, is only green and red were available at the Spirit Halloween store I went to, and only one green was left. The Ryosuken Dragon Dagger is easier to have in a holster than, say, Saba. Okay, I get that. Yes, I do understand that. Like having the dragon dagger, I mean, it's smaller and it's not quite as cumbersome, if you will, as the actual Saba sword is. No, I completely understand. I absolutely get that. That makes sense. And obviously, you got to go with what's available at Spirit Halloween, right? He says, oh, and Tam ordered her Pink Ranger costume. The only challenge left is finding or making the power bow. Yeah, I got to believe that's going to be a bit more, actually considerably more, like, complicated, if you will, to try and make a good approximation of that. But hey, more power to you. If you were able to get that dragon dagger, yeah, with complicated pieces in cosplay, like I'm almost certain that you guys will be able to figure something out, and that'll look pretty good because this looks pretty good, in my opinion. So good job on that. Appreciate that, John. Thank you for sharing. On to questions he has for this first email. So number one, he says we got some movies announced this week, but man, the second Simpsons movie, 20 years ain't so bad. The longest sequel gap, at least theatrically, we've ever had, I believe, was Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 by 60 years. Nostalgia Critic in his Simpsons movie review thinks it's better to do another movie to wrap the series up. I mean, that's probably a good idea for the third movie, but they're going for season 40, so maybe a third film might be the way to conclude the show. Agree or disagree? I get the idea of using a movie to wrap things up. We've seen that done before. They kind of did that with Sex and the City a little bit until they came up with that recent return. Like what is it called? What was the Sex and the City like not revitalization, not reboot, revitalization called. And just like that, right? Yeah, it ran for 3 seasons, and didn't that just end? That just ended earlier this year, right? So yeah, but we've seen shows wrap up their runs with movies. Firefly did the same thing, right? Serenity essentially is the final touch for that. They're not going back to that, especially not at this point. A number of the actors have gone their separate ways with respect to the way that the world is operated, if you will. But yeah, they're as far as using this movie to wrap up The Simpsons. I mean, look, that show has gone on much further than I or anybody else could have predicted. I'll tell you this though, I know they're going for like season 40, right? And I hear what you're saying about a third film. Like maybe that could be the way to conclude it. But I got to be honest. Like when I've talked with people about The Simpsons, I mean, myself, I've only gotten up to season 24. And mind you, the reason I got to 24 is because a couple of years ago, I went on Disney Plus and started binging from the last season that I watched live, which was around season 11 or 12. Really, the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons was me watching the show religiously, me and my family watching the show religiously. Because when I tell you, and I've mentioned this many times before, when I tell you that we watched that show as a family living in Detroit, right? My parents, my sister, we all watched, because Erica wasn't around yet at that time. Like the first within that first 10 years, she was born within that first 10 years of The Simpsons, of being an existing show. But my grandmother watched it, right? And I don't know what it is about those first 10 years. We keep going back to that. Like when it comes to like all the gifts and all the references and all the really hilarious jokes that stand the test of time, a lot of them come from those first 10 seasons. They really do. And I don't want to make it seem like everything since then has been crap. I know a lot of people will say that. A lot of people will just very easily say, oh, well, the show hasn't been great since the first 10 years. But, I found some stuff in that second, like that 14 years or so, like I said, from season 11 to about season 24. I think I got up to the season right up to when Marsha Wallace died. Marsha Wallace, the actress who played Miss Krabappel, may she rest in peace. Also, she was a sitcom vet because she was a regular on the Bob Newhart show back in the 70s. And, like, there's so many episodes of The Simpsons I have not watched that I just don't understand, or just don't know the references and whatnot, right? Even like, I think I watched the Family Guy crossover like once, but, not religiously in that regard. So yeah, I don't get, like, I don't really have like the juice to say, well, they should wrap up the show here, they should wrap up the show there, because they've gone way further than I thought. And whenever I talk to people about The Simpsons, I don't really talk about the later seasons. I really talk about the first 10 seasons. That's just where I know for virtual certainty that when I talk to somebody about The Simpsons, we're talking about, we've all watched the first 10 years, right? I know that. And that's why I can go back to those jokes and those references and those scenes and those episodes, right? Those tree houses of horror, right? Those types of references, if you will. So, yeah, I don't know. Listen, they can keep going however long they want to keep going. More power to them. It is what it is. If they're still getting numbers, if people are still watching them, then hey, they can do whatever they want. They can write their own ticket, right? And people decide whether or not to watch them or not. So, Nostalgia Critic, anybody else, if you checked out a while ago and you're like, okay, this is a great time for them to wrap up the series, I guess that's your opinion, but it doesn't really matter as long as people are still watching it or whatever they want to do, right? Like, they can do whatever they want. That's really my thoughts on it. They can do whatever they want as far as how they want to conclude the show, when they want to conclude the show, what they want to do, right? They can do, The Simpsons can do, Matt Groening can do whatever he wants to do, whatever they want to do. So that's my complete thought on that, to be honest with you. John also included a link at YouTube. He said, speaking of Simpsons, my former friend and I did our own spin on the steamed hams meme back when it was at its peak popularity. Okay, thank you for bringing up steamed hams, right? And I see the I see the clip that you sent here of the steamed hams joke. For people who don't know what the steamed hams joke is in The Simpsons, I'm sure you do if you've watched the show. This again goes back to the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons, because that episode was an episode called 22 Short Films About Springfield, which was season 7, episode 21. And the steamed hams joke, you've seen the memes, more than likely you've seen the clips, right? The whole thing about, Skinner hosting Superintendent Chalmers to dinner or for lunch rather, and it says while hosting him for lunch, Principal Skinner burns his roast and bluffs his way through the meal, replacing the roast with hamburgers from Krusty Burger and dubbing them steamed hams, explaining that it is what people in Albany call them, setting his house on fire in the progress. And yeah, it's one of the. I mean, there's 22 different like seriously 22 different like thought or like plot lines in this particular episode, and it's one of the more hilarious episodes of the show that just combines a lot of craziness. It's like a day in the life, the daily life of Springfield, and everybody doing their things, like all these characters and whatnot. And yeah, it's again that first 10 seasons, the first 10 years, right? And that's all the references, all the jokes that people consistently talk about with respect to the show come from those first 10 seasons. So and however long they go, I feel like most of us that watch the show from the beginning, we're just going to keep referring back to those first 10 years, in my opinion, to be honest with you. But hey, perhaps generationally that will change. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe people of younger generations will talk about some of the episodes from the later years, if you will. I don't know. We'll see. But man, it just continues to keep going and going. Number two, question number two from John in this first email. He says, think they'll ever try again with the Shazam kids in the DCU? It'd probably have to be a hard reboot if they do. I think they'll probably wait until the 2030s. Let me put it this way. Which series is more likely to get another film in the next 10 years? Shazam Family or Eternals? I don't think either one of them are likely to get another film, and here's why I say that. Because Eternals, of course, as we know, did not do well under the MCU. And when I say not well, I don't just mean like financially. And financially, it goes under the COVID disclaimer, in my opinion, right? And yes, I know people will point to Spider-Man No Way Home all the livelong day, and I will just point right back, Spider-Man, bitches. Seriously, like, why are we comparing Spider-Man in that regard? But Black Widow and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and Eternals all came out that year, and had it not been for COVID-19, had it not been for the fact that it was 4 Marvel releases in the back end of 2021, within a 6 month period, I think all of them would have done significantly better financially. But in the case of Eternals, not only did it have the financial asterisk, if you will, as far as its earnings, it also had the Rotten Tomatoes score, right? It's the first MCU film to be rated Rotten. And don't get me wrong, others have joined it since. And now, Rotten films are not an alien thing for the MCU. They had a streak going, and we all waited for that streak to, be broken, and it was, and now it's been broken more than a few times in that regard. So it's no longer a guarantee that MCU films will be certified fresh at the hell site. But yeah, I don't think that the MCU, I don't think Marvel Studios is in any hurry to continue the Eternals plotline. If they do, it'll only be out of obligation if they want to tie in some things that they did further. Like, for example, how long did it take? Eternals was when they established that there was a celestial in the ocean, right? And that was movie 26 in the MCU. And they didn't reference it again until Captain America Brave New World, that just came out this year. And that's movie number what? 35? 35? Yes. Captain America Brave New World is 35. Because if my math serves me correctly, I believe that Thunderbolts is 36. And Fantastic Four First Steps is 37. Yes, exactly. So Captain America Brave New World, movie number 35. So that means that the MCU waited 9 movies. 9 movies over the course of, a 3 or 4 year period. 4 years, really. Well, 3.5, because it was late. The Eternals came out November 2021, and Brave New World came out February of this year, 2025, right? So they waited better part of 3.5, nearly 4 years before even referencing the Celestial that was in the ocean again. And then what do they do in Brave New World? They don't tie it back to the Eternals. They just tell us there's adamantium in it, which is supposed to be a tease ahead to X-Men, right? Which we know they're going to develop at some point, and I am impatiently waiting for that. So yeah, I don't think there's a fat chance. I think there's a fat chance, rather, of seeing the Eternals getting adapted for the MCU further. And yeah, but I would say that they probably have a better shot than Shazam in this regard. I don't know what James Gunn's ultimate plans are for the Justice League, but I don't think Shazam's part of it. I don't. And I really that was such an aimless direction that the DCEU was in post the Justice League disaster. Sandberg does Shazam, brings in the Shazamily, does what he does with it with Zachary Levi, and it does well, for the time and in that particular sense. And it is one of the better movies in the Hamada era of the DCEU, as aimless as it was. But yeah, I don't think they're gonna go. I don't see that happening because then you bring that back in. Well, now here comes the Black Adam stuff again, and we don't need The Rock, chirping about that anymore and whatnot. So yeah, I think that probably if we're talking about another film in the next 10 years, I don't think either one of them are going to get a film in the next 10 years, whether it's Shazam Family or Eternals, but I would give the nod to Eternals only because they may seek to connect stuff from the past or do a limited series on Disney Plus. I don't think that Shazam is in the DCU cards, to be honest with you. I think there are plenty of other more obscure characters, if you will, that James Gunn would like to adapt and go forward with. I mean, come on, we're getting a Clayface movie. We're getting a Lantern show. We're getting Supergirl. Like, we're going to get other things, that we haven't had before we go back to the well with Shazam at this point. And it certainly won't be Zachary Levi. I really don't think that their personal politics are going to vibe very well with respect to that. And I kind of doubt that any of these surprise projects are Shazam in that regard. So yeah, I think that's how I would categorize that, John. Your third question is very interesting, and because I have some serious questions with this. But John's third question is with 2033 rather, and 2034 being the years that Superman and Batman enter public domain, it doesn't necessarily mean Warner Brothers or whoever the owner ends up being loses the rights. Universal Monsters are all public domain characters. They just have limitations of what can and can't be done with the characters. They still got 8 or 9 years in the tank, and I think by that point, audiences might not be as interested in superhero content as much. Maybe that's one of the reasons Gunn chose the Kingdom Come logo because it hardly resembles an S, and if they're doing an 8 to 10 year plan, that's the way to go. Maybe that's also why they're going with a separate Batman, too. Crime Saga Batman's logo was inspired by the character's first logo ever. The more radical the change, the more legal it becomes. Do you see any other big changes for these characters? Okay, I'm settling this once and for all because seriously, I keep hearing people bring up this whole Superman Batman public domain thing, and I have no source of reference on this. Nobody has ever sent me anything. Every time I've tried to Google it, I haven't found anything, but that was on like Google Chrome browser. I'm going to try Safari now. What is Safari providing me here? Okay, Superman and Batman enter public domain. Okay, here we go. So, the first article that I find here, Variety, right? Variety is a trade, right? With respect to Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline. Okay, now this is a piece that was written January 17th, 2024. Because guys, if we've talked about this beforehand on the show, I don't remember it. And this continues to become a thing. I've yet to hear James Gunn say anything about it, right? I haven't heard him or Peter Safran or anybody at Warner Brothers talk about this officially. So here, let's look at this particular article, which I already hate this writer. It's Tatiana Siegel and Gene Mattis. I don't know who Gene Mattis is, but the title of it is When Superman and Batman Copyrights Expire in a Decade, Will It Be Kryptonite for DC? Okay, so I'm going to read this for a second, but this is going to probably piss me off. In fact, this already irritates me. It says about a decade ago, Zack Snyder developed a storyline for the DC Extended Universe that involved Bruce Wayne impregnating Lois Lane. The subplot in which Batman cuckolded Superman was poised to unfold in Justice League, with Batman dying in the sequel and Lois raising their spawn with Superman. Snyder's vision for Wonder Woman was equally unorthodox, with visuals featuring a superheroine who brandished the decapitated heads of her conquered enemies like an ISIS jihadi. I think that, is that all true? Or is, no, whatever. I hate Tatiana Siegel. God, horrible freaking hack writer. Whatever. Warner Brothers and DC Studios, it says, which hold a firm grip on their intellectual property, rejected Snyder's ideas, which were deemed super creepy, according to a source familiar with the back and forth. So is Tatiana Siegel. But in the next decade, artists and rival studios won't need permission to create their own take on the characters. A sad fact of Hollywood is that while superheroes never truly die, all copyrights do. On January 1st, Disney lost control of Steamboat Willie, and within 24 hours, 2 horror comedies starring Mickey Mouse were announced. The DC characters are the next major explorations looming on the horizon. Superman and Lois Lane will enter the public domain in 2034, followed by Batman in 2035, the Joker in 2036, and Wonder Woman in 2037. Chris Sims, a comic book author and Batman expert, expects a flood of unauthorized Batman comics to hit the stands as soon as the copyright expires. Quote, there's going to be 100 of them, he says. They're going to have them ready to go. Movie producers will also be able to make their own versions, much as they already do with public domain characters like Dracula and Robin Hood, though in the beginning they will have to stick to the original versions of the characters. You get Batman, but you don't get Robin, Sims says. You get Superman, but you don't get Kryptonite. The initial Superman could only leap, not fly. Those characteristics are going to fall into the public domain one by one, says Amanda Schreier, media and entertainment lawyer at Morse. DC has been preparing for this for years, it says. At a press event in 2023, CEO James Gunn noted that the next Superman film will include characters from The Authority, a comic series that launched in 1999, in part because the Superman copyright is about to expire. I don't remember him saying that, but okay. Jay Cogan, DC's Deputy General Counsel, laid out a strategy to protect characters that fall into the public domain in a 2001 article. Since only the older versions lose protection, he urged, quote, keep them fresh and up to date. By gradually changing the literary and visual characteristics of a character over time, a character owner can keep whatever the then current image of the character is as the de facto standard in the public consciousness, he wrote. The company has done a good job of updating Superman, argues Stephen Beer, an IP lawyer at Lewis Brisbois, Bisgard, and Smith. Quote, the public's perception is the contemporary Superman. It's distinctive, he says. That gives them a lot of protection. Another tactic, maintain a high level of quality control. The public should be conditioned to view any works from unrelated parties featuring a trademark's owner's characters as second-rate knockoffs, Kogan wrote. Kogan also suggested that trademarks could be used to block the use of a character's name, image, and slogan even after the copyright expires. But trademark is not a cloak of immunity, argues Jennifer Jenkins, director of Duke's Center for the Study of the Public Domain. That only prevents uses that are likely to cause consumer confusion about source or sponsorship, she says. In other words, the character's name should be fair game so long as it's clear that the depiction is not coming from DC. You could still create a Superman horror movie or Batman horror movie, says Jonathan Steinsaper, an IP attorney at KHIKS. You just need to be careful about how you advertise it and how you use images of Superman in a branding sense. DC has done a careful job of tying the characters to itself by trademarking the terms Man of Steel and Cape Crusader, as well as Superman's S and Batman's logo. The bat symbol is a very strong mark, Schreier says. That is going to limit what subsequent creators can do. Even so, expect the mid-2030s to see a glut of off-brand superhero content. Quote, people will make a run at these characters because there's money to be made, says Mark Waid, a comic book author and historian, best known for his work on DC Comics titles like Superman Birthright. Or how about Superman versus Godzilla? It's a gray area, he says. But this town works on the speed of capitalism, right? That's how we work. Sims believes, this piece says, more superhero comics will be a good thing, but the idea that there will be a Superman renaissance is oversold, he says. It's going to come down to execution, Sims says. There's one company that's used to doing it. Steinsaper says nothing would keep Snyder from making a non-Warner's film featuring the DC Troika. Quote, Zack Snyder could reshoot it and make his own new iteration of it, he says. You just need to be careful. For example, he definitely couldn't call it the Justice League. Okay, so that article that I just read from over a year ago, written by Tatiana Siegel and Gene Mattis. That's the most that I have delved into this particular subject that I can recall. Because honestly, if you guys have brought this up before on this show, I don't remember. But either way, I'm running with this particular episode here. As of Sunday, October 5th, 2025, this is where I'm officially entering the discussion with respect to the whole public domain thing. So here we go. This says that Superman and Lois Lane enter the public domain in 2034, so that's in 9 years. And then the year after that, in 10 years, Batman will enter public domain in 2035. A year after that, the Joker in 2036. And then a year after that, Wonder Woman in 2037. Okay, so we're talking about a scenario where within the next decade or so, we're talking about Superman and Lois Lane, and then Batman, the Joker, and Wonder Woman entering public domain, and other studios can do stuff with it. Well, to be very honest with you, John, a lot of what was just said in the piece that I read answers the question for me in that regard. Because your question was, do you see any other big changes for these characters? And let's see, going back to what you had said, you said maybe that's one of the reasons that Gunn chose the Kingdom Come logo, because it hardly resembles an S, and if they're doing an 8 to 10 year plan, that's the way to go. Maybe also why they're going with a separate Batman too, because Crime Saga Batman's logo was inspired by the character's first logo ever. More radical the change, the more legal it becomes, right? So as far as other big changes, well, I don't think they're going to be big changes, John, but I do think what's going to happen, especially, listen, if that quote is true, and if Gunn said that they did make those decisions with respect to Superman because they know he's going to enter public domain soon, then yeah, the DCU is going to be about establishing what the official brand of Superman is tied to DC directly, right? Because only one of these brands when it hits public domain is going to be tied to DC directly. It's going to be what he does, right? And that's the hope, right? If the DCU does fulfill the entirety of its 10-year plan, that's the hope, is that the Superman that he's established here with David Cornswet will be considered the standard, and everyone else will be considered a knockoff. It'll be the same for the DCU Batman, be the same for the DCU Lois Lane, Wonder Woman, Joker, right? So, you know what? People that are tired of Joker, people that don't want to see Joker pop up in the DCU until later, well, it's going to happen before 2036, right? We're going to see a DCU Joker before 2036, one would think, because Warner Brothers and DC want to establish a standard. And it is also going to come down to money. I feel like, they're going to make changes here and there, and they want to do something different, right? This works to their advantage as well, John, because the changes that they want to make, they want to stand out not only from all the copycats that may show up when the public domain, happens, but also in terms of differentiating the DCU from all previous iterations of these characters, right? So that you really do wind up with a shared cinematic universe that doesn't look exactly like Batfleck, that doesn't look exactly like Keaton, doesn't look exactly like, Reeve or Ralph or, Henry Cavill, anything like that, right? They're establishing their own paradigm and refreshing the genre, right? Because I still balk at the idea of audiences might not be as interested in superhero content as much. I don't buy that, and the reason I don't is because audiences have been interested in superhero content on the screen, the big screen, literally since the 50s and 60s, right? Superheroes as a genre continues to evolve and exist. It's been around for literally generations. I don't think all of a sudden, just because we've had so much of it in the last 20 years, I don't think all of a sudden, oh, people are going to peel back. No, I think there's always going to be room for those stories, that there's always going to be an audience for those stories. If anything, what we've seen this past year with respect to Superman's resurgence of popularity in the general audience, I think that absolutely tells you that superheroes as a genre is not going to die off, and it's not going to really slow down in that regard, right? Maybe things will get refreshed, maybe things will get rebooted, but superheroes as a genre, I don't think that's going to die. I really don't. People keep talking about, well, westerns are going to die. No, they're not. And neither are science fiction films, neither are, autobiographical films. I mean, these are all subgenres of the big ones, right? Whether it's science fiction or, nonfiction or, historical drama or thriller or mystery or crime or whatever. No, there's all these subgenres within genres. And no, I don't think they're going to die. People that keep declaring like a slowdown or, people are going to be as interested. No, I feel like that's another fan complaint. I feel like that's another fan concern that we make up because we're fearful of that. We're afraid that, oh no, people aren't going to watch superhero movies anymore. How long are we going to be afraid of that? Like, literally look at Batman and Superman in particular. Both of those characters have had deaths, if you will, as far as like, the commercialism of their films, right? The Salkinds, for all intents and purposes, as far as fans are concerned, killed Superman from the big screen for 19 years. And yet Warner Brothers still went back to him. And even when Superman Returns didn't do as well financially as they wanted, they still brought him back again 7 years later. So how is it that Superman has all the gaps that Superman has had? He's still around, right? So this idea that, oh, people aren't going to be so interested in it, no, that's not true. It's absolutely not true. Because you had audiences that were clearly invested in Reeves Superman in 1978, and they went all the way through to 87, and yeah, okay, it slacked off. And then, for whatever reason, the Superman Live stuff with, there's a whole documentary about it, the Nick Cage thing. That didn't happen. Okay, so we don't get another Superman until Superman Returns in 2006. It's 19 years. And it doesn't work out quite as well because there's too big of a generation gap, right? But then you wait another 7 years to do Man of Steel, and now you are getting fans of that. However polarizing people want to act like it is, that movie made money. And so did BVS, right? And they were building things there. And even through all the turmoil and all the nonsense and all the chaos that DC Films and their aimless direction was going, it was still a case where people knew who Superman was. People cared about Superman on some level. And so then you wait another 12 years before his next solo film, and look at the PR. Look at everything that has happened this year with respect to the resurgence of Superman. So I do not buy whatsoever any idea of audiences might not be as interested in superhero content as much. I think that's false. I would defy that. I think that's absolutely not going to be the case. I think depending on how it is framed and what it's going to be different. the genre changes, right? 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we would have never thought of Ant-Man having a trilogy. We've never thought of Guardians of the Galaxy having a trilogy. We never thought they would get adapted, let alone have trilogies. Did anybody think that the Avengers were going to get center stage and become a bigger phenomenon than the X-Men or the Fantastic Four or even the Justice League? No. Nobody thought these things 20 years ago, and yet that's the world that we live in now. Black Panther has two movies that have totaled nearly $2 billion earned with respect to the both of them, right? In fact, it might be over 2 billion if I calculate it completely. The over 1 billion that the first film made, and then the 859 million that the second one made in that regard, right? So, look, superheroes are never going to die. Like the genre is never going to die. The audience is always going to be interested in superhero films going forward. It has stood the test of time throughout generations. So as long as DC Studios positions themselves to be the ones that have the most resources, the most money, the most experience, right? Like that article talked about, they're the ones most experienced in making Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman films and stuff with the Joker and whatnot. They're going to look better. They're going to be better, right? Subjectively speaking, in that regard, they will be the ones like directly associated with DC. So whatever these offshoots want to do, whatever the craziness, and the whole supposition Zack Snyder could do his own thing, he's not going to. He's not going to do that. Like, why? Like, if somebody opened that idea up to him, maybe, but I don't think that's a well that he necessarily wants to return to. Why? What for? He would want to connect to the DC stuff, right? Because, like you said, there's going to be restrictions. There's going to be certain things. There's going to be certain, like, Sherlock Holmes is a great example, right? Because as I understand it, remember the Benedict Cumberbatch, Martin Freeman BBC series that went on for like 4 or 5 seasons, right? As I understand it, the BBC not only had the rights to, even though Sherlock Holmes was in the public domain, is in the public domain, they had the rights to the actual Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stories that they could adapt for their show, right? So that's why they were able to do like a direct Hound of the Baskervilles and direct Study in Pink and stuff like that, right? Like they were able to go straight to the source material. Whereas the CBS show Elementary, that went on for like what, 5, 6, 7 seasons, however long it went, with Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu, they could only use public domain characters. They could only use Holmes, Watson, Moriarty, and I think one or two others, right? But they couldn't adapt actual stories from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. That's the difference, right? And they both succeeded. And they both had money behind them. But I feel like people, when they talk about Sherlock, they talk way more about the BBC series with Cumberbatch and Freeman than they do about Elementary with Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu. And that's not to say Elementary was a bad show. I would like to watch Elementary at some point. I've only seen the first 3 episodes of the first season. I did like what I saw, but not enough for me to continue. I watched way more of Sherlock over on the BBC in that regard, right? So I think that's a good example of how it will play out. And that's a high end example. That's an example of, right, BBC and CBS, two corporations with money across the pond at each other, adapting Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, right? Like that's the best case scenario. I still don't think that with respect to this public domain stuff with Batman and Superman and Lois Lane and the Joker and Wonder Woman, I think there's going to be a bigger disparity, right? I think you're going to see, like a lot of these fan films. We see fan films, right? People cite fan films using these characters, or like the State Farm commercials that came out earlier this year that everybody was freaking out over, right? Or not everybody, but a lot of people were freaking out over. You're going to see a lot of that quality, and it's not going to look the same as what DC Studios is doing, as what Warner Brothers is doing with the direct DC licensing, right? And they're not going to have everything, right? They're not going to have Robin. They're not going to have side characters. There's going to be other things that are going to be tied up in trademarks. And I feel like DC Studios and Warner Brothers are going to have all of that, all those ducks in a row. I think they're going to be far more organized when that time comes because they're going to be prepared for it. So I'm really not worried. I really am not worried, to be honest with you. It'll be interesting to see what other offshoots do, but yeah, I'm not terribly worried about it, to be honest with you. I mean, unless you have like a bigger, and you're gonna maybe Amazon. I mean, who knows? However, the industry evolves in the next 10 years, right? And I've said many ways, a lot of times rather, that we're gonna move off of coaxial cable and broadcast and over the air to Ethernet. Everything's going to go to the internet, right? So streamers are going to get bigger, right? So what if Tim Cook at Apple or Jeff Bezos at Amazon decide in 2034, 2035 to do a Superman of their own or a Batman of their own, right? is it still going to look the same as whatever DC Studios has, right? Well, that's going to depend on who owns DC Studios. Because what if that ends up being Paramount? What if it ends up being Paramount buying Warner Brothers and they get DC Studios? It's still going to look different. And whoever has done it the longest is going to have the biggest leg up as opposed to the others. They are, right? You know, and I get it. Batman Cape Crusader, that awesome show, is over on Amazon, but that was sold to Amazon, right? That was a property that was sold by DC that said, hey, we're going to sell it to you. You go ahead and take care of it here, right? And we're all looking forward to season 2 of that, right? Most of us are, I would say, right? But again, that came from the parent company and that was given over. That wasn't developed by Amazon, right? So it's going to be, I'm not worried about it. I think it's going to be fine. And I think you're just going to see the DC studios and the DCU come up with its own distinctiveness to be considered the standard for these characters going forward to separate them from all the other public domain attempts that happen when this occurs. Okay, there we go. I feel a lot better. I feel a hell of a lot better talking about that now because I don't feel like I've ever really delved into that quite so much. Maybe we have talked about it before, guys. I apologize if we have, but that's the biggest deep dive that I can recently remember with respect to that. All right, so that's my official position with respect to the whole public domain stuff, and I'll have to recall that and we'll refer back to this episode with respect to that, you know, if we talk about this going forward as we get closer to the public domain stuff and as more discussions pop off with that. And once again, no, I don't think Zack Snyder is just gonna all of a sudden decide to do, because I'm sure the cultists are waiting for that too, right? Like that's their next long-term plan. The Snyder cultists are like, well, just wait until it reaches public domain and then he can do whatever. No, he can't. No, he can't. He can't do the Justice League, and it's also not going to include Cyborg and the Flash and Aquaman and everybody else that doesn't go public domain in the next 8 or 9 years, right? So yeah, be ready to shut that down. You know, after we shut down the whole idea of Netflix buying DC Studios, because no, they won't resurrect the Snyderverse if that were to occur, and I don't even think that's going to happen. I think Paramount's going to take it truthfully. I think Paramount is they want to get the deal done for Warner Brothers Pictures or the streamers and studios in that regard, and they'll get DC Studios along with it. I think that's more than likely what is going to happen, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right. So that was a really long answer to his third question. How about his fourth question on this first email? He says, going to try something with sports here. Oh, okay. Here we go. He says, I'm very, very casual when it comes to sports. I'm terrible with names and stats. I'm the equivalent to a casual moviegoer that doesn't check movie news websites. If I watch the Super Bowl or NBA Finals, I'm pretty much going in blind, which ironically, I think it's rare to be a casual fan in sports. A century-long cultural tradition is someone going to a bar and watching a game. I think most countries do this. What are the advantages and disadvantages of doing this? Are you a casual on any sport? Like, I know you follow basketball, baseball, football, and hockey. I hope to see a San Jose Sharks game with Tam when I move there next year. So here's the thing. Like you said, ironically, I think it's rare to be a casual sports fan. I would disagree. I would very much disagree with that. I don't think it's rare at all. I think there are plenty of casual sports fans, and I think they're the ones that you see go to games, right? Go to watch a baseball game, you know, regular season, right? Not playoffs, because obviously ticket prices are higher. You get more diehards. However, you don't get all diehards with respect to that, right? But look at a regular season baseball game, a regular season basketball, football, hockey game. You're going to see a ton of casuals. Absolutely. People that, you know, couldn't tell you who the players are or what the positions are, right? They're leaning over to their friends like explaining, okay, what does that mean? What does this mean? Asking about rules and all that. This is the whole reason why, and this doesn't happen quite as often. I remember back in the day when I used to work in Master Control for an NBC affiliate. I remember over the weekend, I remember the weekend that I learned rugby, right? This isn't one of the majors, right? But the weekend that I learned rugby was the weekend that I had to switch. I was in Master Control and I was switching that they were doing a thing called Rugby Sevens on a Saturday that NBC was broadcasting over the weekend. And they used the broadcast as an opportunity to teach the audience what the rules of the game were. And I remember back in the day, ESPN also would do that. ESPN2, I remember Dave Strader and Darren Pang were the announcers on this, and they would literally do certain games. It wasn't a ton of times they would do it in a year, but they would broadcast a hockey game. And during that game, they would have graphics and whatnot. They would explain the rules for people who didn't know what they were, right? If you don't know what icing is, if you don't know what offsides is, if you don't know what a two-line pass is, which there's no two-line pass anymore, they got rid of that about 20, about, wow, is it 20 years ago? 10, 15 at least. They got rid of the two-line pass rule in hockey, whatever, right? But the point is, they would explain the rules. They would explain to you why this happened, why that happened, why a whistle was blown, what this is a penalty, where that's a penalty, right? They would do that with respect to hockey here and there, just like they did for that rugby sevens. That's how I learned how rugby works, right? I now know how rugby works. I learned the rules of rugby. So now if I watch a rugby highlight, I get what's happening. I understand exactly how it's scored and what's going on with respect to tries and scrums and all that stuff, right? But they also do this with football. There is a thing, and I think I've talked about this before, but when they do, because CBS has a major NFL contract, and CBS, of course, and Paramount, they own Nickelodeon, and so what they'll do in the playoffs, and I think they've also done it in the regular season a couple times, is they will do a wild card game specifically for the Nickelodeon audience, and they will gear it toward children. They will, and not only will they have like different announcers for the kids that are calling this actual NFL playoff game, but they will also again explain the rules, right? And the clever way that they do this, in my opinion, the clever way that they do this is that whenever a flag happens or whenever a new rule comes up that people may not know what it is, the kids may not know what it is, they'll pop up an animation and the actor who plays young Sheldon will pop up as young Sheldon and will explain that rule of football. And why is that cool? Well, because if you're a fan of Big Bang Theory, or if you're a fan of young Sheldon, you know that his character, Sheldon Cooper, learned football in addition to all the other incredible, like, astrophysics, or not astrophysics, theoretical physics that he learned before he became a professor at Caltech, right? Like, he knows football because he grew up in Texas and his dad was a football coach, right? And so the idea is that's just the random crazy thing that he happens to know extremely well, and you learn that in the third season of Big Bang Theory, and they use it sparingly throughout the show. But then when they did Young Sheldon, they showed, okay, here's how he learned it, here's when he learned it, right? And so having him explain it in a Nickelodeon wildcard NFL game to kids is just icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned. It's a very clever way to explain the rules of football to a younger audience that doesn't quite get it. So I think that in a lot of cases, these networks and whatnot, they do cater to the casual fan. So being a casual fan of sports is perfectly fine. You can get a basic understanding of how things go and enjoy yourself, especially if you go live. You go to a game live, like you said, you hope to see a San Jose Sharks game with Tam when you move there next year. Hockey's fantastic to watch in person, right? And the Sharks have been good here and there. How were they this year? I can't say that or last year I should say, because the new NHL season is about to start, to be honest with you. But let's see, San Jose Sharks. I'm going to look this up just to give you an idea of like how they have been recently. Well, last season, let's see, what was their record? The 2024-25. So, okay, they were 8th in the Pacific Division, 16th in the West. Okay, they did not make the playoffs. Oh, boy. 20, 50, and 2, and 12, rather. So that's 20 wins, 50 losses, and 12 overtime losses. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, that's not good. Oh, Mike Greer is their GM. That's crazy. Mike Greer, who used to play hockey way back in the day, he's now their GM. I'm getting to that age where, like, a lot of players that I used to watch back in the 90s and early 2000s, now they're coaches and general managers and, like, in charge of the organizations that I'm still watching. And it's like, oh, great. That's just another way for me to feel even older. But at any rate, yeah, the Sharks aren't that great. They are in the Pacific Division of the Western Conference, so they play in the same division as Las Vegas, the LA Kings, Edmonton Oilers, Calgary Flames, Vancouver Canucks, Anaheim Ducks, and the Seattle Kraken, right? So it's a big division. It's 8 teams in that division. And yeah, I mean, it's fun. Hockey in person is fun. I've never seen San Jose in person, I don't think. I don't think I have. Because all the in person hockey games, most of the in person hockey games I've been to have been Detroit Red Wings. And they've all been at Joe Louis Arena. I haven't even been to Little Caesars Arena. It's been around for like 7 or 8 years. I still haven't been there. I need to do that. I would love to go to a hockey game down there in downtown Detroit at some point. Hopefully, I can make that happen in the not too distant future. But yeah, there's no shame whatsoever in being a casual sports fan at all. As far as me being a casual on any sport, I mean, casual, like, I don't intently follow soccer or rugby or any of those others or golf, but again, I still know the rules. I still know how they're scored, right? And so I think that as far as being a casual, you don't have to. Being a casual doesn't mean you're ignorant of the rules. It just means maybe you don't follow it as religiously. So yeah, PGA and like soccer, yeah, I don't follow those religiously. I definitely would call those casual. But no, I am not a casual when it comes to the four majors, basketball, baseball, football, and hockey. Now, that's not my ranking. My ranking, as far as my favorite sports, football and hockey are my 1A and 1B, and then baseball, and then basketball. That's my hierarchy with respect to that. So, yeah. And I should also point out that as of right now, three of our four local teams in the Major Four are good. I mean, good enough to make the playoffs good in that regard. The Lions have made the playoffs the last 2 years in football. They're primed to do so again this year, especially with the way they're playing. They got a game coming up here shortly as I'm recording this against Cincinnati. Hopefully, they don't. Fall asleep at the wheel, and hopefully they take that team seriously. No matter how bad Cincinnati's been this year, you can't take any opponent, lightly in the NFL in that regard. But they've made the playoffs the last couple of years. The Tigers all of a sudden have become, a better team. They made the playoffs last year, got to the divisional round. They're in the divisional round now. They got a big game tonight, where they are going to tonight, as of me recording this, game 2 of their divisional series against Seattle. They won last night, which was kind of a surprise for a number of us. We weren't certain that they were going to win that game, but they absolutely gritted it out and toughed it out. Did a really awesome job there. So tonight they got their best pitcher going out tonight. So hey, maybe they can get a 2-game lead, and then when they come to Detroit, maybe they can close the series out. I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of myself because Seattle's good. Seattle's really good, as we'll talk about here later with another of our emailers. But yeah, and then the Pistons basketball. They made the playoffs last year. They're on the they're on the up and up. Like they're on the up and coming, if you will. They got a new general manager. They got some new stuff going on. So some new players. So yeah, hockey we used to be awesome. The Wings used to be like the best team in the NHL, and yeah, they've fallen off heavily in the last decade. And they're trying to rebuild, but man, has it been tough going for them. It really they just have not been able to figure it out, and that's another one where Steve Yzerman, a player that I used to watch religiously, the captain of the Red Wings, he's the general manager. He has not done a great job the last 6 or 7 years, really has not. And this team still has not made the playoffs, and they're entering the 100th year of the franchise. This year is the centennial that they're entering because the franchise was established in 1926, and so the way that hockey and basketball seasons operate, they start in the fall and end in the spring/summer of the following year, right? So it's always a half and half. So this year is the 2025 to 2026 season. That will be the case for both basketball and hockey because they start at the same time. Hockey starts in October, basketball starts in November, right? Baseball is always in the summer, right? Starts in April, ends in October. So it's always just one flat year. In football, even though the playoffs happen in January, February, I think those are also considered one flat season because the regular season all ends, starts in like September, ends late December, early January, right? So they don't consider that the same deal in that regard. But yeah, hockey entering the Wings entering their centennial existence, they better make the playoffs or else people need to be fired. Like I'll say that in that regard. But yeah, I feel like you are at an advantage being a casual because you may not be as emotionally invested. You won't be as emotionally invested, which means that if your team loses that you're rooting for, you're not going to be as crushed. When you are a diehard fan of any sports team and they lose, it wrecks your day, it wrecks your week, it might wreck your month. Like it's as bad, if not worse, than people who decide to be tribalistic and fans of Marvel and DC in that regard. And if they get a bad movie, or a movie that they think is bad, a movie they didn't enjoy, like the people who went and saw BVS and they didn't sit right with them and they messed up their sleep for a week, which I think is really I don't agree with that personally. I know people that felt that way and still feel that way about it. And it's like, okay, get a grip. It's just a movie. Sports is different because that's a competitive environment and there's a rooting interest there. And, it's measured on wins and losses and actual competition. Like, that's not the case with movies, right? We try to do that. And you see a lot of people that have tried to turn it competitive like that with box office and whatnot in the last 10 to 15 years. It's bullshit. You shouldn't do that. Scoreboard mentality is nonsense and very toxic and extremely tribalistic. But with sports, it's encouraged. Like that's part of the deal. So if you're just a casual sports fan, then you have a lot of the emotional attachments that we don't, being those of us that are non-casuals, and you won't be as upset. And it won't ruin as much of your day or your life, emotionally speaking, going forward if your team loses. So there are benefits. There's definitely benefits to being a casual sports fan as opposed to being a diehard sports fan. So I think you're good. I think you're good. I listen. I have no issues whatsoever. Hey, you got any questions? I'll answer them the best of my ability with respect to being a non-casual sports fan in that regard. So, thank you for that. Appreciate that, John. So that was John's first email, which took as long as it did. Was his second email as long? Let's see. Not quite. This one is titled "Will Peacemaker Ever Find Peace?" All right, so here let's start talking about Peacemaker season 2, episode 7. He goes, number 1. So, what do you guys want to talk about? And this is a gif of Cody Rhodes saying, "What do you guys want to talk about?" A catchphrase current WWE champion Cody Rhodes uses a lot. He says, "Fitting gif." As Cena has subjectively speaking overshadowed his own underwhelming wrestling retirement year, Cena turned on this guy early this year, aligning himself with a villainous Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Travis Scott, and turning heel for the first time since 2003 and beat him for the WWE title. But then after a few months turned good again and Cody beat him for the title back. Why do I bring this up since I know you don't follow wrestling, he says. Because 2025 is Cena's year not so much as a wrestler, but as an actor. You gotta understand something, he says. For 20 years, I've had to hear men between 15 and 50 boo this man no matter what he did. Even when he gave good matches, the good graces weren't always there. But damn, that performance in the latest Peacemaker episode. If those guys couldn't give him his flowers as a wrestler, I'd be damn shocked if they didn't for that performance on the show. Holy crap, I couldn't be more proud of Cena, he says. He's the first celebrity autograph signing I ever went to see him 20 years later as an A-list star is incredible. The PTSD Chris Smith has seeing his teammates trying to kill Keith was executed to perfection, the best I've ever seen him do. John, if they couldn't see you before, they are most definitely seeing you now. Your time as a wrestler is up. Your time as an actor is now. Any thoughts on this week's episode? My thoughts on this week's episode, John, are in this week's episode of Flightbox, which I posted yesterday. So listen for my full thoughts on this week's Peacemaker episode with respect to my thoughts on that. But as far as Cena's acting, I mean, you're essentially echoing the same thoughts that James Gunn had. And, I've seen this sentiment pop up on threads about he deserves an Emmy for what he did, not just, in this episode, but also this season, right? There's been a lot of praise heaped on him and Jennifer Holland for what they've done. And, I second that. And, Gunn was talking about how, no longer should he be considered, John Cena, that is, no longer should he be considered a wrestler turned actor. He is an actor. And I think that's very well put, very apropos, especially with what he's done in 2 seasons, really, of Peacemaker. He really has turned into an actor in that regard. So, the people that, want to consistently refer to him as a wrestler turned actor, no, I think he's graduated. I think he's definitely moved into actor territory at this point. And what he decides to do going forward, what his choices are going to be. I mean, he's in the catbird seat as far as I'm concerned with respect to this. And what he's doing in this show is allowing a lot of people to put him in a character, put him in a class ahead of The Rock, with respect to acting, to be honest with you. And to me, he's getting to Dave Bautista level, right? Dave Bautista, I think, still is showing a bit more range and wants to pursue some more things, but Cena could absolutely do the same thing. And those two could be neck and neck, or maybe Cena could even overtake, depending on, what he does, right? Because have I necessarily seen Bautista do anything that, like what Cena's doing so far in this series? Not quite. Not that I can immediately recall, but yeah, he absolutely is an actor at this point, no doubt about it. Never mind him being a wrestler turned actor. I echo that sentiment. And the other email that you sent, the companion photo, you did send an image. You posted this 3 years ago. The picture that you're talking about of you autographed with you and John Cena. You said he always told us fans to never give up. I never did. Yeah, that's awesome. That is an awesome image of you and Chris Smith, aka Peacemaker himself, which is what I feel like a lot of people are going to regard him as now as far as characters. They're going to look at him. There's going to be a decent amount of people that will look at him for this show and this character now before even thinking about his WWE days. And I think that's a great testament to what he's done as an actor so far, what he continues to do, and where his career is headed in that regard. So, yeah, I'm with you on that. That's awesome. So the next couple of questions you said, speaking of wrestling, We had our first practice game for our wrestling D&D on Friday and are going to try and make it a regular thing going forward. Just hope we can get at least 3 or 4 more people to join. 2 others are ready to go and 2 that are in the queue, but I am curious, have you ever played D&D or Magic the Gathering? Nope. I have played neither. I have many friends that have, but neither one of them are things that I've ever gotten into, to be honest with you. Not really necessarily my thing. The closest that I've done to either of those things is fantasy football. And why do I say fantasy football? Because fantasy football, going back to sports briefly here, John, fantasy football is the sports fans equivalent of Magic the Gathering and D&D. It is. Most certainly is, especially when you talk about tabletop and whatnot. Absolutely, yes. Without question. I've said that for years and I will continue to say that. So that's the closest I've gotten to playing D&D or Magic the Gathering is fantasy football, which I haven't played fantasy football in a couple of years. Did not play this year again. Maybe next year I'll change that up. We'll see. But all right, third question on the next email. He says, I have to say it feels right now being a DC fan. I'm guessing you're saying it feels good? You might have been missing a word there. You said, I'm starting to get a general idea where things are going. I think there's a strong possibility we get introduced to the Monitor in the near future. It might lead to a crisis type event. I just don't know what kind of crisis. Am I reaching here? Yes, in my opinion, you are reaching. But I understand why this is something, again, I talk about in Flightbox with respect to this week's past episode of Peacemaker. Fandom brain gets the better of us. We see things developing in a new shared cinematic universe. We see things developing in a show. We see things developing in a movie. And our brain that attaches itself to years, decades, generations worth of source material, whether it's the comics, whether it's animated, whether it's other shows or other movies, all that goes into our thought process and our imagination runs wild and we start thinking, hey, this could happen or that could happen. And what have I said for a long time? The reason that I don't do that is because I want to allow the creatives to take us on their journey that they have carved out for us. And I don't want any of my own personal expectations to overshadow that. I think that's why when I posted what I did about Peacemaker episode 7 for this season, I think that's why Anthony misunderstood what I was saying because he interpreted my post on Threads as me being disappointed in this past week's episode, which I was not. It's just that my brain went to the same reaching place that your brain did here in terms of getting introduced to the Monitor and lead to a crisis event. Yeah, I think you're thinking too big. I don't think the DCU is quite going in that direction. I think we hear names, we see characters, and it's like, oh, well, this might happen. Yeah, I'd pump those brakes. Absolutely pump those brakes. And let's just allow James Gunn and Peter Safran to take us on the journey that they are taking us on, that they have started us with respect to Creature Commandos, which I still need to flip and watch, and Superman, and now Peacemaker Season 2. So, yeah, I would not think of Crisis. I would not think of the Monitor. I would not think of any of that right now. And quite honestly, I can go ahead and throw this into the mix. We just saw that within the last 5 or 6 years in the DCCW, the Arrowverse. So yeah, I would not, I would not count my chickens on that one. I would not personally, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is part of the DCU plan, but I don't see that being the case personally. And I think we should just, like I said, let it play out. Let Gunn and Safran, completely, let us see where they're going to take us in that regard. So we'll see how that goes. All right, your fourth and final question here. You said Tam got us Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 combo for Switch 1 and 2. I never had the chance to beat the game. Now might be that opportunity. I forget, did you say you beat either game? I beat Mario Galaxy 1. I beat Mario Galaxy 1 multiple times. I beat it on the Wii, and I've beaten it on the Switch, because I got the Super Mario All-Stars for my 35th anniversary Red and Blue Mario Switch that I got a couple years ago off of Amazon. And I've beaten that. I've beaten Super Mario the first one. I have not beaten the second one. I don't know that I've played the second one sparingly, but not a ton. My video game drought continues. Like, I used to play video games religiously when I worked at GameStop, and since I got into TV over the last 12 years or so, I haven't played video games nearly as much. Shonda laps me in that particular category because she's in the middle of Borderlands right now, Borderlands 4. She's, that franchise has a grip on her right now at the moment. But if it wasn't that, it'd be Assassin's Creed. If it wasn't that, it would be Halo. If it wasn't that, it would be some melee She's laughing at me right now, saying stop telling her business because she can hear me recording. But no, and here I'll put it to you this way: I bought an Xbox Series X a couple of years ago, and I don't play it nearly as much as she does. She plays it way more than I do. She's got so many more hours and whatnot. In fact, I'm kind of surprised she's not playing Borderlands right now. Maybe she is, or maybe she's got an inkling to pick up the controller. I don't know. But yeah, I have not played video games nearly as much as I used to. Would like to get back into it. So at some point, I got to play Mario Galaxy 2. I got to play Odyssey. I haven't even played Mario Odyssey. I am so far behind. I talk about how far behind I am on movies, TV, and comics. I'm even more far behind on video games. I used to be a Grand Theft Auto junkie, and I haven't even played Grand Theft Auto 5, right? Got everybody and their brother waiting for Grand Theft Auto 6, Rockstar dragging their heels with respect to getting that off the ground, and I still haven't even played 5 yet. That's awful. I'm woefully behind with my video game playing. But yeah, Mario Galaxy 1 is the only one that I've officially beaten between those two titles that you listed. I've not played Galaxy 2 or Odyssey. And yeah, those are just a few on the list of games that I desperately need to play at some point. Especially Mario. How can I call myself a Mario fan? He's my favorite, as my favorite video game franchise of all time, and yet I am behind on Mario gaming. I got to get going on that. My goodness, whatever. There's too much shit to watch and play. I'll put it that way. But either way, I think that's going to do it for John's feedback this week. Thank you, as always, for your feedback, John. It is greatly appreciated. Hopefully, I gave you some very comprehensive answers to all of your questions this week. All right, next up, Mr. Stuart Little checks in with his email titled Peacemaker Thoughts and Other Stuff. The other stuff he was talking about, he had some great recommendations for Batman comics and whatnot earlier, so let's hear what he has to say this week. He says, hello, 3 things this week to bring up. You said if anyone had any more commentary about ongoing series like Peacemaker, feel free to chime in, and I've got some thoughts. And he wrote this next sentence in all caps. He says, spoilers on for everything up until episode 6, since I don't know if you've seen this week's yet. I have. You could have talked about this week's. I absolutely have. And that'll certainly be the case for the next flight chat for next week. No, I can't stay behind on those. I got behind on 4 and 5 only because we were out of town and I had to get caught up on those, but that was it. I've been up on them like since then, like everything else outside of that, but I am caught up on this. But either way, let's see what he has to say about Peacemaker Season 2. Stu says, I think the season has been really good so far, and I don't mind it having a relatively slower pace compared to how Season 1 handled the plot. There was a lot of emotional fallout from the first arc that needed explored here, and was a good basis for Chris and Harcourt's stories this year. The alternate Earth stuff has been good and weirdly fun, given the twist, but they were willing to go full comedic and silly with the more trivial differences, like cheery O's with an O, and there's more of that in episode 7, by the way. Yes, there is. Scrabble. Right, that's really silly. The other vigilante, he says, being interchangeable with the Prime version was a nice subversion, as I fully expected their bonding over listing similarities to result in the Nazi reveal and for us to then get a massively violent fight between the two Adrians, which they absolutely could have done with one stunt double wearing the fully mask. They could have even had one of them killed, but it left it ambiguous which, and the survivor rejoins the main group, and we have the tension of if he's the good one or the Nazi. Would that have been an acceptable use of dramatic irony for you? No, I would have hated that, truthfully. I would not have liked that whatsoever. And I am glad that they avoided that. Because that, to me, that really feels tropey if they would have done that. I'm glad that this Adrian, because the idea, like, I get where Gunn's coming from. He's using Adrian as the grounder, if you will, the grounding piece of the puzzle, right? Like, no matter what, like, people were commenting on how there's been all this emotional growth with other characters except Economos. He's grown like 1%. And that's true. Economos is an asshole. Like, he's been an asshole all the way from the Suicide Squad. But as far as Adrian is concerned, he is resolute in his convictions. And just, it made sense that since he was so gung-ho on finding his other version in that universe, on Earth X essentially, that they would be exactly the same leading up to the whole Sons of Liberty thing. And that's where the differences come into play. But it's not that they're fundamentally different, it's that their relationship to Peacemaker is different, because Peacemaker is a flat out Nazi on Earth X, whereas he's not one at all on our Earth, like on the proper Earth, if you will, right? So the idea that they subverted that trope and didn't give you this whole thing like, okay, which is the good peacemaker, which is the good vigilante, which is the bad one, which one came through. I've already had somebody suggest that the vigilante that shut the door was actually ours and not the other one, right? And that the other one is the one that's actually gone back over to our Earth. But truthfully, I, could they do that? Maybe, but I don't see Gunn doing that. I think it probably is the proper Adrian that did go back with the group. I don't think anybody is a holdover, but again, they lingered on Keith for however long, so we'll see exactly how all the Earth X stuff still plays out in the season finale, if it plays out at all. To be honest with you, or going forward with respect to that. But no, I wouldn't have liked that dramatic irony. That would have irritated me. And the reason I say that is because like it would have been very like if they had gone that route with Adrian and they'd made one clearly a Nazi, and that's where the violent fight occurs, right? Like what would have been his motivation to go to the other Earth, right? Then you're talking about now we're going into Crisis on Earth X territory where it's like, okay, he's trying to infiltrate the other Earth because here's another world that the Nazis can conquer. And it's like, well, do you really want to do that? Are we going in that direction? What does he believe he can do in that regard, right? He doesn't need to leave his Earth if he felt like he belonged there in that regard. So, yeah, I would not have liked if they had made one of the Adrians a Nazi and done that particular type of dramatic irony in that regard. I'm glad that that's not what they did, and that they subverted that particular trope, because I feel like I've seen that done a decent amount of times in other things. We don't need that anymore. So good on James Gunn and crew, cast and crew, for not going that route. He says, I do wish that I had not been online so much before this reveal, because people were calling the Nazi Earth thing as early as after episode 1, when there were no actual hints toward that, given how contained the other Earth stuff was to the top trio's house. As such, I was far too aware of the whitewashing in subsequent episodes rather than having a chance to notice it more organically. That's interesting because I didn't see anybody calling for that until a bunch of us noticed in episode 3 all the background actors. That's really where it started for me, and I guess, yeah, I guess I would consider that more organic. But that's where it hit me, and that I don't remember, like, for me personally, as far as social media and whatnot is concerned, I don't remember seeing anybody like come to that conclusion. And I even watched that episode before seeing anybody's thoughts with respect to that episode, right? And even because those were one of the 5 that was screened for like Brandon Davis and the press and whatnot. And yeah, it wasn't until episode 3 that I heard anybody else suggest, because when I watched the episode and I caught it, and I'm like, I wonder if anybody else, like, I wasn't certain if anybody else had caught it, and I was actually relieved that like so many others had completely caught it and were like, yeah, this is probably Earth X. This is probably some other Earth that, where brown people are just not a functioning part of society, not allowed to be a functioning part of society. So I guess it did happen organically for me, but I didn't see a whole lot of the predictions before episode 3 when we saw the background actors, to be honest with you. So sorry that it went differently for you in that regard, Stu. He says, by the way, are you aware of the Fortnite controversy, where the Peacemaker content that has the emote of a dance move from the season 2 intro that was taken down because the developers weren't sure if the arm movements were meant to be the forming of the shape of a swastika? Part of me thinks that's a reach, but part of me also thinks that's also just the sort of clue Gunn could have put right in front of our noses all along. I haven't heard about this, but it was taken down because okay, I see. Well, yeah, now that's a different that's a different concern, because game developers, like, people that don't watch Peacemaker could see that and go, "Hey, what is this?" Right? People catch freeze frame and catch shit all the time. It very well could have been on purpose, and I'd have to go back and look and see if that was the case. And that's where a rewatch of a season like this could potentially yield clues where it's like, hey, maybe he did do this on purpose. Maybe he did do that on purpose. I don't know. I'm not sure. Other freeze framers and whatnot can do that. But yeah, I had not heard about that, but it doesn't surprise me either way, to be honest with you. He says, I also think that an aspect of the story to ponder is how the other version of Chris had issues with drugs, anger, and his relationship with Harcourt. Harcourt? Harcourt, okay. I got your play on words there. Of course, I think Gunn was the one that said they've been calling her Thirst Court on the set. And whether this stems from self-loathing about being complicit in this horrible world, and possibly having to hide his bisexuality. Somebody brought that up, and I forget who. I've seen some people on threads bring this up. The idea that the reason that Chris had issues with drugs, anger, and his relationship with Harcourt is because he was self-loathing and because he was in the closet, essentially. And listen, there's real world parallels with that, aren't there? Right, where we talk about a lot of the individuals that seem to be pro bigot and seem to be anti LGBTQ plus and the like are hiding their own identities, and they are dealing with a lot of self-loathing, and they do reach for drugs, they do lash out in anger because they feel like they're living in a world and in a society that doesn't accept them, and in many ways society and the world doesn't accept them, and so they lash out at it in very self-destructive ways. And yeah, that is possible. That very well could be possible. And it's one of those things that we'll never know if that Augie was able to detect that, or if he felt that the anger issues and whatnot were because of him just leaning headfirst into the whole Nazi ideal and whatnot. Like it's intriguing to think about what that peacemaker might have been, and why he might have had the issues that he had. But yeah, I think that is something to think about for sure. If we want to talk about any of the broader strokes with respect to that version of the character. He says, in general, I also like the new cast members. David Denman's been really interesting as Keith, with the bond he has with Chris and the friction that's going to cause in the future. I always like Tim Meadows, he says, so Fleury has been a welcome addition, as has Saul Rodriguez as Sasha Bordeaux, whose cybernetic implant sparks a theory in me of a possible future DCU storyline. Bordeaux got the cybernetic enhancements in the comic during the events of the major storyline, the OMAC Project, where Max Lord was revealed to be a checkmate agent who activates an AI-controlled project that uses nanotechnology to turn people into metahuman hunting killer cyborgs. Gunn has said he doesn't really like the villain version of Max Lord, but with Superman and Peacemaker emphasizing the government's unease with metahumans increasingly influencing global politics, I could see this developing another way as part of the Gods and Monsters storyline, possibly even with Lex's already established nanotech being repurposed for that. Cool. Fandom brain at work again. And again, I don't want to make it seem like whenever I use the term fandom brain, I'm just like trying to call out, hey, okay, you're stretching, or hey, okay, you're trying to elaborate on things based off of limited evidence because of what you know from the source material. No, you can elaborate and speculate all you want. All I'm saying is I'm not really going to do that. Like, I will listen and I will entertain the ideas, and if you ask me if you're stretching, like John did, then I will offer my thoughts and opinion on that. I think what you're talking about is certainly possible. I'm not saying that it is impossible. What I am saying is I'm willing to let James Gunn take us down that road, and that if it isn't this, I won't be disappointed. Right? I will judge that situation based on, like, I'm not gonna like say he does something different with Sasha Bordeaux and it's not what you're talking about. I'm not going to refer back to your email here, Stu, and say, well, Stu brought this up as a possibility, and now that's the only thing I could think about. No, I'm pissed that it's not going to happen. Plenty of fans do this. I'm not saying you do this, Stu, but I'm saying plenty of other fans, like somebody else, in theory, could hear your whole premise and go, oh, that's a great idea. I hope he does it. And then if he doesn't, be pissed at him because he didn't do it, right? I'm going to full-fledged avoid that possibility with respect to that. And I will just say that your like scenario here is certainly possible, but we will see. We will see where Gunn takes us with respect to that. All right. Now he says, my next topic, he's got a paragraph break for this one. Here we go. My next topic is one I alluded to in my last email. I use streaming services to watch a lot of stuff, and recently through that, I watched the 1999 remake of the Thomas Crown Affair for the first time, as well as the 1960s crime thriller Point Blank, and rewatched The Great Escape for the umpteenth time, and it had me thinking about classics and criteria we use to determine what they are. Because I think an acceptable definition of classic, he says, would be a work of high quality that manages to be appreciated as such well past the initial period where it was made. Seems simple enough. It's easy to see why Star Wars or The French Connection or To Kill a Mockingbird would all fall under that term, but all those examples predate the modern era by many decades. So what I'm getting at, he says, is how far back does a movie have to be from to be considered a classic in 2025? Because thinking about it, I have to say that the 1990s was the last time I could firmly say felt like a different era to me. Yes, there's stuff from the 2000s that feels dated in terms of fashion and maybe some light cultural stuff, But on the whole, I feel like the year 2000 until today is very much defined by being the post digital age. In the 90s, CGI heavy movies were still seen as impressive and difficult to do compared to how commonplace it is today, and how the subject of technology in film was still very speculative in terms of where computing would take us. I should point out here, he says, that The Matrix was first released in 1999 when the internet was a thing, but still in a developing stage. Films were shot largely on film rather than digital then, too, and there was still a lot more stuff being done practically in that regard. And also, given the expense and greater technical challenges of those types of blockbusters, I feel a lot of other genres had way more presence back then. Remember how big rom coms used to be? And how even in the 90s, practically driven action movies had a considerably larger place? Things seem a lot more franchise driven now, he says, especially with how Marvel inspired everyone to try to do a connected universe. I feel I've wandered a little way off from what is a classic to things are different now and too samey, but am I making any sense? What is a classic by today's standards? Yeah, I get what you're saying, Sue. And yeah, I mean, I feel like the what is considered a classic and how things are different now, it's kind of one and the same discussion in many ways, because in order to determine what is a classic, you have to acknowledge what has changed in those times, right? Like think about go back to the movies that you mentioned earlier. You talked about Star Wars, French Connection, and To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Well, why are those all considered classics? Well, a big part of it has to do with the era that they were made in. Classics are above all considered old, right? So Star Wars is considered old. It was made in 1977 and is approaching 50 years, right? 2027 will be the 50th anniversary of the release of that film, right? Same, most certainly, with The French Connection, which was early 70s, and To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think even predated that, right? So I think anything that is considered considerably older is considered a classic. And I think that with respect to your supposition that the 90s, right, the idea that the 90s would be considered the last decade that, things were considered different, I think certainly 90s movies are considered classics. I've heard people refer to Hackers and Clueless as classics, right? I most certainly have heard that. And also, you know what, here, let's bring this to a physical media standpoint, because I'm seeing a lot of movies now get the like collector's edition treatment, right? Like Clueless has a collector's edition 4K that just recently came out this year, a steelbook as well. And Hackers has a limited edition and collector's edition. Spawn just recently got a limited edition version that was released by Arrow Films in 4K, right? You're seeing a lot of these movies get released, and these are 90s movies. So I absolutely would agree with you that the 90s as a decade, those films most certainly can be considered classic. But I also think that with respect to times changing and with respect to generations, I think the definition of classic can also be considered generational. A film that I was told just this past Friday by a coworker that is considered a classic is The First Mean Girls, a movie that I have still never watched because, to be honest with you, I didn't have much interest in seeing this film, but it's a film that continues to get referenced and, like quoted and whatnot by a number of people, right? It's generational. When that first movie came out, that was 2004. So we're talking, what, 21 years? And I, was in college at that point. I had no interest in watching anything with Lindsay Lohan or anything with that particular like that. That was not my target audience. Like I'm not the target audience for a movie like Mean Girls, but I know people that consider that movie a classic. Like Gen Z and maybe even Gen Alpha considers that movie a classic, so much so that they rebooted it last year, right? So that's even early 2000s. So I feel like the classic definition is generational. I feel like there are people that consider, even movies made 15, 20 years ago as classics. And maybe that's what the actual definition of classics is. Maybe it is based on generation. Like what was classic to a particular generation? Obviously, Star Wars and French Connection and To Kill a Mockingbird, classic to, Gen X, or boomers in that regard, right? Like in that regard, obviously movies in the 90s are certainly going to be considered classic to millennials, right? We're going to consider those films classic. I agree with you very much on that. And perhaps films from the early 2000s, and going forward into the decade, if you will, perhaps those are considered classic by Gen Z in that regard, right? So I think that the classic definition is generational in that regard, right? Like, say somebody out there wants to consider the prequels classics. They can do that. They can, as far as I'm concerned. And I know from my perspective, like as old as I am, right? Having been born in '82, do I necessarily consider the prequels classics? Perhaps not. But am I going to argue with somebody that does consider the prequels classics because they grew up with them, right? Remember, I've talked about how Star Wars is generational. And like and I think most millennials, we grew up with the original trilogy as our trilogy, right? That's those three films are what we glommed onto. Gen Z glommed onto the prequels. They most certainly did, right? Their first turn in Star Wars, what got them into the franchise, was not Luke, Leia, and Han. It was Obi-Wan, Darth Maul, and Qui-Gon, and young Anakin, and Count Dooku, and everything going on there, right? And Padme, right? Like all of that. That was what their entry point to the franchise was. And as I've warned people, you keep coming for the sequel trilogy, and at some point, Gen Alpha, and I've already started to see a bit of it now, they're going to come for you and defend Rey, Poe, and Finn just as vigorously as we've defended the original trilogy and just as vigorously as people defend the prequel trilogy in that regard, right? So at some point, you're going to see a generation call the sequel trilogy classic, and it may be abhorrent to you, right? But that's how they're going to proceed. So that's what I really think is the definition of what makes a movie classic is, how did it impact your particular generation? And so, like I said, I agree with you. When you say that the 1990s was the last time you could say a film firmly felt like a different era to me, I would agree. I would certainly agree with that. But I also agree that the 2000s can feel like a different era as well, depending on certain films. So if somebody argues the 2000s, I'm not gonna argue with them on that. And then depending on how the industry goes, within the next 10 to 15 years, I mean, listen, 2000s films, anything before 2008, like especially for comic book films, is not going to feel as franchisey, even though franchises were there, right? It's not like Batman wasn't a franchise. It's not like Spider-Man wasn't a franchise. It's not like X-Men wasn't a franchise. They just didn't do what the MCU did, right? And so that's changed things with respect to the landscape going forward, right? And different expectations and different bars that are set with respect to movies and the era itself. So that's what I would say. I think that the classic term depends on generation. I really feel that way. Really do believe that way. And I won't dispute anyone's argument because that is very subjective. That is extremely wholly subjective, right? And I think there is this predilection to say that, well, if it's old and like black and white or whatever, then it's automatically a classic whether you like it or not. Well, I feel like the same could be said for, like you talking about movies that were shot primarily on film. Are those now considered classic? I think people would consider those classics whether they like it or not, right? And then you can say that forward and say, okay, well, how about digital films that don't use a ton of CGI? Are those considered classic? Perhaps so. Perhaps to someone, right? Perhaps to a younger generation in that regard, right? So yeah, I think it's highly subjective and it varies based on generation, in my opinion. I'm totally with you on that one. So yeah, that's what I would say. That's my somewhat complicated answer to what is a classic by today's standards. I get exactly what you're putting down, but and again, what is a classic is very much, there's a lot of overlap between that topic and things are different now because that's what denotes a classic is what has changed over time with respect to film. So all right, he says, to finish, I have a slightly less complicated pick one nerddom question for you. If you could press a button and make it so that one of the following overused, played out opinions about Batman would never be stated again on social media, which would you choose? A. Bruce Wayne should just use his wealth to improve the state of Gotham rather than invest it into dressing up as a bat to beat up the poor and mentally ill. Or B. It really doesn't make sense at this point for Batman not to kill. Whenever he puts the Joker in Arkham, he inevitably escapes again and kills way more people. So really, if you think about it, those deaths are actually on Batman. So basically, the he could be an actual philanthropist argument versus the no kill rule. Which one is more annoying, or which one is more overused and played out? Which one would I never want to hear again? This to me is an easier choice. I gotta go with B. I am so tired of the no kill rule. And it's such a subjective ass rule, right? Because I still don't hear people complaining about the 17 people that Keaton's Batman killed, right? There are 53 on-screen deaths in Batman 89, and Keaton's Batman is responsible for 17 of them. And most of them are Joker's thugs. In fact, they're almost entirely Joker's thugs. Oh, and the Joker himself. But I hear nobody complain about that, right? Jack Nicholson's Joker did not go to Arkham. Jack Nicholson's Joker died. Dead. We saw the body. The corpse is there. Okay? I haven't read Batman Resurrection, but I did read the synopsis in terms of what it does, in terms of suggesting that the Joker came back. He didn't. Spoilers. Sorry. Like, he's dead. I say that to say that, Batman's no kill rule went out the window in Batman 89 and out the window in Batman Returns, right? Keaton's Batman killed. Okay? Like, there was no issues with that whatsoever. And even with Bale's Batman, he's responsible for deaths. Okay, how many people did he blow up in Ra's al Ghul's house, right at the beginning of the film? It's so to me, I feel like that one that's got to go. And how did Stu phrase it again? He says it really doesn't make sense at this point for Batman not to kill. Whenever he puts the Joker in Arkham, he inevitably escapes again and kills way more people. So if you really think about it, those deaths are actually on Batman. Oh, okay. So I guess it's not so much the no kill rule. I guess the way that it's phrased, this is a little bit different. Like, this is people arguing that he should kill, or that it doesn't make sense for him not to kill. So I guess in that regard, now thinking about it, to be honest with you, no, I think I'd still go with that one. Because here's the thing: the whole thing about him, he should just use his wealth to improve the state of Gotham rather than invest it into dressing up as a bat to beat up the poor and the mentally ill. Well, those are people just being stupid about all of his mental issues, right? Batman has mental issues. His mental issues are well documented, and it's part of the reason that his character exists. So if you're going to be a dumbass and just ignore that, I mean, I'm not going to, that doesn't even, we're going to push that aside. That doesn't even get the time of day. But the whole thing about it really doesn't make sense for him at this point to kill, like, or for him not to kill in that regard. Like that's, I don't think that's a great argument either, truthfully, because I get why he doesn't kill, because he doesn't want to try and turn into the monster. But there are definitely times where he is the monster, like I said in Batman 89 or in Batman Begins. So I guess ultimately both of these arguments are stupid. Both of these arguments are overused. But yeah, I think the worst one is the whole anything involved with him killing or not killing is a worse argument that I don't want to see. Because look, I think there's room for both interpretations. There's room for a Batman that kills, and there's room for a Batman that doesn't. And you can do that. Maybe we'll see that more in the public domain, right? Maybe in the public domain, we'll see somebody come up with a version of Batman that's just a straight up murderer, right? Openly killing thugs, openly taking them out. There is no Arkham Asylum because the criminal population of Gotham is being decimated, like in a very lethal sense, and he essentially is the Punisher in that regard, right? Maybe we'll see that as a public domain Batman, perhaps, right? But there should still be a latitude for that, because that opens up a whole other realm of complexities with respect to, I think there's room for both interpretations. I don't think there's room for saying that he should just be more of a philanthropist, because him dressing up as a bat to beat up the poor and mentally ill is part of his psychosis. It's part of his issues, if you will. It's part of how he deals with it, because he is a human and he is flawed, and that's a big part of his flaw. So, it's so I guess, am I arguing, like, now I'm confusing myself. Am I arguing that I want that thrown away, that never say it on social media again, as opposed to the other? Maybe I am arguing that. Yeah, you know what? I am arguing that. All right. So in a weird way, everything that I've literally said in the last 5 minutes has actually had me pick choice A. Bruce Wayne should just use his wealth to improve the state of Gotham rather than invest it into dressing up his bat. That get rid of that. Yep, get rid of that one. Because the other one, like I said, there's room for that interpretation. There's room for that discussion, right? There's more room for the discussion in B than there is for the discussion with A. The discussion with A is stupid. I mean, I don't like necessarily the discussion with B either, but at least there's a counterpoint with B. With A, you're just ignoring the character. You're just dismissing the character. You're just, like throwing the character, putting the character in a box and acting like it's a, you know what? A is a CinemaSins argument, and F CinemaSins. I hate CinemaSins. I despise CinemaSins. CinemaSins has ruined a generation of movie watching, has ruined people with respect to any type of critical thought, or like any type of subjective thought with respect to movies and television and whatnot. CinemaSins is horrible. CinemaSins is toxic. CinemaSins is disgusting. I despise it, and the people who created it should go to hell, in my opinion. I'm just going to throw that out there, right? I am not a fan of CinemaSins and how it has ruined movie discourse for the last however many years. And that a argument, as far as like using his wealth to improve the state of Gotham instead of dressing up as a bat, yeah, that's a cinema sins argument. So yeah, get that one out of here. Destroy that. Go away. Absolutely. Now, how did you like how I organically came to that conclusion? I thought this out. I talked this through, Stu, and said, okay, wait a minute, I'm leaning towards this. No, what I've actually done is talked about how the other one is worse. Yeah. So yeah. Argument A. If I never heard somebody again say that Bruce Wayne should just use his wealth to improve the state of Gotham rather than invest it into dressing up as a bat to beat the poor and mentally ill, I think I'd be happier with that. Yep, be way happier with that. Get rid of that one. Destroy it. Never stated on social media ridiculousness ever again. There you go. Cool. That was awesome. I like that a lot. Thank you for that thought-provoking question, Stu. Appreciate that scenario. And he says that's all he's got for this week, especially as this has taken him away from playing Ghost of Yotai, which he got yesterday and is pretty sweet so far. Take care, Stu. Thank you, Stu, as always, for your feedback. Greatly appreciated, sir. And enjoy Ghost of Yotai. All right, next up, our resident Superman superfan Waliyu Mustafa with just a quick one, he says, for this week. He says, hey, Ray, just a quick one regarding the latest episode of Peacemaker Season 2. A much shorter episode this time around, 32 minutes. I hope your suggestion comes true in that the season finale is longer than all the episodes this season. We'll see. No, he confirmed that, Waliyu. James Gunn confirmed 57 minutes. The final episode of the season is 57 minutes. That's official from the boss and the creator himself. So look forward to that. He says, I didn't expect the episode to go the way that it did, though I was right about Harcourt and Peacemaker having to fight their way out of Argus. And that huge mural on the wall. Haha, I love how it wasn't shown to the audience and Chris until Harcourt mentioned it. Now that's hilarious. Yeah, and it also just shows you just how isolated and just, how distorted Chris's view was. He didn't catch that. He didn't catch the copies of Mein Kampf on everybody's desk. And apparently, according to this, I saw this clip earlier because I haven't been listening to the companion podcast, but apparently they also had a thing where they had a bunch of extras that were sporting Hitler mustaches. And they had to wear them like for days and like leave the set and come back and whatnot. And apparently those got cut out. So there were a bunch of guys and Argus agents and whatnot with Hitler mustaches that we did not see. And that's a very distinctive mustache that you just can't wear in public without people, like saying WTF in that regard, regardless of where you're at, even here in the US. So yeah, that's a shame that it got cut out, but it is what it is. But yeah, just really shows you how isolated and insulated Chris's view was and how distorted it was, that he didn't catch all this other Nazi paraphernalia all over the place on Earth X, essentially. He says, thank goodness Adebayo didn't get caught, but was saved by none other than Judo Master. He clearly was able to handle his own in that universe. I did enjoy the chat he and Adebayo had. Nice for them to get to know each other a bit, even if he went back to Argus on Earth 1, because he still works for Flag Senior. Yeah, he had to do that. He had to, go back and switch sides when they had that stare down. And I think they get that. They understand that. I think the only one that's really going to get like arrested per se is going to be Chris, because he essentially exonerated the others with his statement at the end. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out in the season finale. He said seeing Sidney Happerson was good, and I had a feeling it would be him that we would see in this episode given his expertise on all things portals. I did let out a huge laugh during the after credit scene with him. My partner, on the other hand, found it really crude and cringy. I was like, my man has been incarcerated for who knows how long. Let him have his fun. Yeah, for people who didn't see that, basically he's sitting at the computer terminal in the post-credit scene, and all the post-credit scenes for Peacemaker have been jokes and like outtakes, essentially, and he just basically warned the guards that he was going to like load up the machines with Pornhub and was about to basically make a mess all over the machines. I'm paraphrasing what he said. What he said was a lot cruder, and yeah, I see both sides of it. I see what your partner was saying in terms of how disgusting and crude and cringy it was, but I also get what you're saying, Wally, for sure. And that's, yeah, it's understandable, but still also disgusting at the same time, for sure. He says, and it looks like Harcourt has come around to the idea of being with Chris, the way she held him on the peace cycle as they were being chased by the police and his reaction to it. She wanted him back. He came back, if only to get himself arrested at the end of the episode. And I didn't expect to see Fitzgibbons, though I probably shouldn't be surprised that this version would be a Nazi. I completely forgot that Fitzgibbons is from season 1 because I didn't do a rewatch. I didn't go back and do a rewatch, but I knew I had seen him before. I'm like, I've seen that actor before. I'd forgotten that he was Fitzgibbons in season one, and then I saw other people mention. I was like, oh yeah, that's right, for sure. So yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, he's part of the police, right? And in that on that Earth, the Nazis won World War II. So yeah, any law enforcement is going to be in that vein. So yeah, should not be surprised whatsoever. He says, speaking of Nazis, it turns out Augie 2 is not a Nazi after all. I didn't see that coming. The way he was talking to Keith and trying to calm him down and forgive Chris for accidentally killing his Chris. This Augie had more heart than his doppelganger. We learned he met his doppelganger and said how he had a darkness about him. He wasn't wrong. Swap them two, and Augie 2 would have fit well in Earth 1. Yeah, I definitely talked about that in Flightbox because, yeah, that particular line, like, that's if you just chew on what Augie said about on what Augie 2 said about Augie 1 and where he came from, chew on that for a second, and then kind of wrap your brain around the commentary that it's speaking about the world that we live in, if you will. So yeah, I went into that for a bit on Flightbox talking about this. He says, Keith, on the other hand, boy, if we do get a season 3 or even some kind of continuation in which we see Keith arrive on Earth 1, I look forward to the clash between him and Peacemaker. Perhaps? Because I will be honest, part of me is wondering, is it just going to be that clash? Or is he going to think a little bit more about how Peacemaker one, like Chris, stopped the others from killing him, right? Like, is there going to be any type of compassion from Keith whatsoever with respect to that? I know that a lot of people are just assuming that he's going to be a villain and be out for blood, and that may be the case. But maybe he won't be. I don't know. I'm just opening up that possibility that perhaps that last moment, that caterwaul, if you will, that I also talked about in Flightbox, maybe that's going to change his mind just a bit if he sees Peacemaker again. So we'll see. As for the world of Earth 2 itself, Wally says it looks like we were right and that the minorities are all in camps and are being forced to work as slaves, judging by what Vigilante 2 and Judo Master were talking about. Yes, that definitely seems like that is absolutely the case on that Earth, but we didn't see it represented. It's just was spoken, and we didn't need to because the story was centered around the 11th Street kids and everything else. And again, Flightbox. Flightbox, I go into it in depth for sure. He says, anyway, that will do for me. Just wanted to get this in before I head to bed. Late again. LOL. Enjoy your week ahead and give my best to Shonda. And yes, I meant to say Masters, which is what we call it here too. Thank you, Wally Mustafa. Okay, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, you know how it is, man. Across the pond, there can be different designations for things, especially in academia. So just wanted to be certain of that. But thank you for the kind words and the well wishes as well, good sir. Always appreciated. Give my best to you and yours indeed. Hope the kids are doing all right. Hope the other half is doing all right. Hope everybody is doing well. We'll talk to you soon, good sir. All right, next up, I mentioned the return of a longtime listener who has contributed to the feedback circle before his returning, and that is Sam Freeman, back with an email titled Flight Chat Peacemaker Thoughts. So good to see you, Sam. They say, hey there, Ray. There is a baseball game tonight that I know we are both tuning into. My Mariners are going against your Tigers. It's always interesting when our teams clash. Thoughts on tonight's game? Well, Sam, you sent this last night. Actually, yesterday. It wasn't last night. You sent this yesterday, and game one was last night. So my thoughts beforehand, going into the game, was I was uncertain. And quite honestly, I was expecting a loss because our rotation wasn't quite set. We couldn't go with Scooble for game one, right? So, and especially since we were starting Troy Melton, the kid, and it was going to be a bullpen day, I wasn't really giving us a whole lot of credit because I didn't know, like, the last time Seattle played Detroit, they batted them around in a sweep at Comerica Park, and scored like a ton of runs. And, it just wasn't a good day for our pitching staff. It wasn't a good couple of days for our pitching staff in that regard. And so my hope was that, the bullpen wouldn't necessarily implode in game one, and that maybe, Seattle having a bit of rust, having the bye, would help us out. As it turns out, I think it really did help us out because we did win the game, right? It took 11 innings. Once it got into extra innings, I'm like, okay, well, it's only a matter of time before our bullpen blows it because, Vest and some of our better relievers have not had, the greatest stints in relief, if you will. And we used, I think, almost the entirety of our bullpen last night. So, I mean, it's great to get the win. And I've seen a lot of writers say that we stole the win. And I get why they say that because of all the Tigers end of the season being in the wild card and definitely being the underdog, going on the road. But the Tigers also were up 15 and a half games in the division with a month to go. So it's not like they were playing necessarily like a wild card team for the majority of the season, just that last part. And I get it. That last part is what counts. Okay, fine, whatever. But the Tigers are a good team. They do have issues with respect to their lineup, and I really don't know how far they're going to go. But it was going to depend on, in a best of five, it was going to depend on whether or not they could get the split in Seattle, and they most certainly have now, right? They won game one, which is not the game I was expecting them to win. McKinstry gets that big hit, the bullpen shuts it down, so that's huge. That's really huge. I was not looking for that to be the case. Now we'll see tonight because I know that it's a foregone conclusion from everybody that Tarek Skubal is just going to mow everybody down, but I still have questions about our offense. Are they going to give him the run support in that regard? So that's what it's going to come down to. So I feel good, right? I feel at least good that we got the split. If we can get tonight's game, then I will feel even better, obviously, because then we've only got to win game 3 or 4 in Detroit to get to the ALCS. And I know that's at your expense, but it is what it is in that regard. So, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised with how last night's game went for the Tigers, but we'll see how it goes in that regard. I mean, Seattle, tough team. Like the AL West, I don't put anything past any team. Look what the Blue Jays did last night. They destroyed the Yankees 10-1, which is phenomenal. But man, that's not a team I think either one of us necessarily wants to see anytime soon in the playoffs, and yet one of us will, whichever one of us wins the divisional series. But yeah, my goodness. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I was not confident going into last night's game. I would have been way more confident tonight, and now we're in a great spot. The Tigers, the Tigers are in a great spot because you got your ace going on the bump tonight, and if you can just give him some run support, then yeah, we're going to be in really good shape. But we'll see how it goes, right? That's why they play the game. So we'll see how it happens. Go Tigers. But at any rate, Sam says, so I haven't joined in on the discussion around here for a while. I don't believe I even gave thoughts for Superman. Well, let me just say I loved that movie. It was fun, emotional, uplifting, and at times even darker than I was expecting. And I'm really happy to say that I'm a huge fan of both Man of Steel and Superman. Both films are great. There you have it, Sam. That's what I'm talking about. Those of us that can be happier than tribalist Superman fans and enjoy both the Zack Snyder film and the James Gunn film, right? We are not Snyder cultist. We're not Gunn cultist, right? We're not the anti-Snyder is really what they are. It's not even necessarily Gunn cultist. It's really anti-Snyder cultist. We are neither. We enjoy both. And for me, it's 1A and 1B. Man of Steel is 1A, Superman is 1B as far as the best Superman movies made to date. And listen, sorry, not sorry, Christopher Reeve fans. This is my subjective opinion. That's how I feel about it. I still own all of them, right? I have all of the Christopher Reeve films. I have Superman Returns. I own Man of Steel 4K, and I have Superman 4K. So there you have it. All Inglorious Steelbook, I might add. But yeah, both films are fantastic, no doubt about it. Sam says, and with Superman, the DCU was off to a great start. Box office was great, and the reception was fantastic. And now we're on to Peacemaker Season 2. I have loved this season so far, they say. I think the work Gunn is doing with the characters is great, and I enjoy the plot and how it relates to the characters' journey and the rest of the DCU. I get how people feel about the pace of the show, but it doesn't bother me, they say. The only thing that sucks is waiting for a week because after each episode, I'm wanting more. But in a good way, this season is very much about the personal journeys of the 11th Street kids, and specifically about Harcourt and Chris's relationship with each other and how together they can both heal themselves. I think the big reason why this season hasn't been an issue for me is because of the other shows I love. My favorites being Hannibal, The Leftovers, and Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. They say they all focus more on the characters, and there's often long scenes of these characters talking and interacting. If you're invested, it's very engaging, and I've been very engaged with Peacemaker Season 2. And that's a great point. Thank you for bringing up those other shows, Sam, because, Hannibal, Leftovers, Midnight... Now, I haven't seen Leftovers and Midnight Mass, but I have seen Hannibal, and you're right. They're all character-driven, or at least from what I've heard, character-driven. Hannibal certainly is character-driven. And yes, long scenes of characters talking and interacting. And we've definitely gotten that in Peacemaker, right? It's definitely one of those types of shows, right? And for people that were expecting it to be a balls to the wall action series, no, that's clearly not the direction that they've taken for this season. It's clearly they want to tell a more personal story. They want to tell a more character development story. And there's nothing wrong with that. I personally have not had issues with that pacing whatsoever. And again, I talk about it in Flight Box with respect to how I have enjoyed the character work and the actual emotional development and those scenes. Like Adebayo and Judo Master, playing Scrabble, or even some of the conversations between Chris and Harcourt earlier on, and that type of thing. Yeah, it's that type of a series. It really is. It's not a balls to the wall action series. It's an emotional series. It's a character driven series. And that's very engaging for me. I agree with you, Sam. Sam says, I'm also very happy with the connection so far to Superman and the rest of the DCU. The Lex scene was amazing. Agreed. So I'm happy if that's the biggest cameo and we don't get more. Superman would be awesome, but I'm not expecting it. That way I won't be disappointed. I'm really curious to see how this last episode wraps up this season's story. I know I'll be back to discuss it. I'm on record as saying what my cameo hopes are. I still have a Dark Horse cameo hope, Sam, that if it happens, I will be really elated. If it doesn't happen, I'm okay. Like, I'm not going to be, it's not going to ruin anything for me, right? It's just one of those. It's like, I really hope it happens, but not looking for it necessarily, right? And then the Superman one, my belief on that really came from the set photo that Danielle Brooks took with David Corenswet because they were filming Peacemaker season 2 and Superman at the same time for a little bit, on the same studios and whatnot, and the fact that he was in costume during the picture. Now, it could have just been they were visiting each other's sets, right? And initially, I figured, no, this kind of indicates Superman's going to be in it. But then Gunn apparently told Variety, one of the trades, that no, Cornswet's actually not happy that he's not going to get to be in it, and Holt was in it, but it just didn't work out. So it leads me to believe, Sam, that perhaps they did film something for Cornswet's Superman and it just didn't fit, and they ended up cutting it out. And it's not in the final product. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We've got one episode left. We got one season finale. Potentially series finale. Who knows, right? Because some people are suggesting the Peacemaker might not make it out alive. But either way, we'll definitely have plenty to talk about next week. So looking forward to your thoughts with respect to that. But to finish off this email, Sam says, right now, I'm binging all of Paul Thomas Anderson's films before I see one battle after another. I've seen them all before except two, but it's been so long since I've seen them and I was a teenager, so I have a much deeper connection and understanding of them now. He's one of my favorite directors for sure, and I just finished Inherent Vice last night. Only two left before I watch one battle after another on Monday. I'm also seeing Anemone on Monday, so it should be a fun double feature at the movies. Have you seen any of PTA's films? Thoughts? Yes, I have. But here, let's go down the list because I know I'm behind. Right? I know that there was a time Paul Thomas Anderson. He's one of those directors that when he first came on the scene and first started making like a name for himself with those of us in like film fan circles, like he was recommended to me by a friend of mine, another friend of mine, Phil, not my old boss Phil, but another friend Phil that I had way back from high school. And I watched his films kind of in the same vein. I mean, it was teens, but it was late teens, right? It was high school going into college, right? So I've seen the first four PTA films. I've seen Hard Eight, which is also called Sydney, which came out in '96. I've seen Boogie Nights. I've seen Magnolia, and I've seen Punch Drunk Love. In fact, I own Punch Drunk Love in 4K as part of the Criterion Collection, and that is still my favorite Adam Sandler performance to date. And I realize I haven't seen Uncut Gems either. There's a number of other films of his that are more serious roles, if you will, that I would like to see. But Punch Drunk Love right now is my favorite of his roles. That's the last that I saw of PTA movies. Everything since then that PTA has done, I haven't seen. I haven't seen There Will Be Blood. I haven't seen The Master. I haven't seen Inherent Vice. I haven't seen The Phantom Thread. I haven't seen Licorice Pizza. And yeah, One Battle After Another is the new one, and I've seen the trailer for it. And the trailer looks awesome, and the cast looks fantastic. But yeah, I've got some PTA catch up to do, to be honest with you, and I might do that, because the thing is, I didn't watch these first four PTA films in order. I saw Magnolia first, which is crazy because that's a 3 hour long one, right? Saw that one first, and I believe then I saw Boogie Nights, and then I saw Punch Drunk Love, and then I went back and found and watched Hard Eight afterwards, right? And yeah, I don't remember a whole lot about Hard Eight, other than it being a crime drama. I remember Magnolia. I remember a good deal of, even with it being 3 hours. Magnolia, the one that I remember the most is Punch Drunk Love. Punch Drunk Love was great. It was hilarious. It was fantastic. I love the story. Had a great heartfelt story behind the character, and his chemistry with Adam Sandler and Emily Watson just did a really awesome job in that particular film. I really liked that. And my favorite scene in Punch Drunk Love is, well, there's a couple. I love when he finally gets his comeuppance on the mattress man and his and the brothers. The especially there's that point where they'd been harassing him and threatening him earlier, but there's that point where they hit his car and you know all he sees is the blood dripping from Emily Watson's head, and that's what inspires him to get out the car with all manner of adrenaline and power and just beats the shit out of those guys and smashes the one window out with the tire iron and hands it to the brother that's like sitting in the truck, right? And then just goes off, and then he goes and just basically like threatens Mattress Man, like, no, you will leave me alone, that's it, and like goes all the way there to basically say, you will leave me alone now or I will beat the shit out of you. Like, I just love the confidence that he gained. That also kind of started from the confrontation he had over the phone when he was trying to get the number to find Emily Watson from his sisters, and his sisters were horrible to him. He's just like, all I want is the effing number that should be GD good enough for you. Give me the effing number. Do you hear me? I'm sick of this effing shit. Right? It just, him standing up for himself in the second half of that movie gave me so much energy. I love that. I love that movie. So that probably is my favorite PTA movie. But I'm with you. I should rewatch Magnolia. I should rewatch Boogie Nights. And I should rewatch Hard Eight, truthfully. And then maybe get caught up on everything else he's done since then, because I didn't realize he'd made this many movies since the last one of his I'd watched. That's crazy. So, okay, I've got some catching up to do. Add this to the list. Yep, add these all to the list. Good grief. There Will Be Blood, The Master, Inherent Vice. Who's an Inherent? Oh, okay. So he went through a Joaquin Phoenix thing for a bit, and then of course Phantom Thread is Daniel Day Lewis. Licorice Pizza. Who is that? Elena Haim and Cooper Hoffman. Okay, but also Sean Penn, Tom Waits, Bradley Cooper, and then of course yes, DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Del Toro, Regina Hall, Tiana Taylor. Yeah, that's in One Battle After Another. So yeah, lots for me to get caught up on with respect to PTA, but I can tell you that the four movies of his that I've watched, his first four films, I do enjoy. Sam, I do remember liking them. So yeah, I have to revisit those and then get caught up on the rest of PTA's work. So with that in mind, I don't know when I'm going to see One Battle After Another. I don't know. Might be after a while, but we'll see how that goes. It might end up having to be a Patreon feature, if you will, for Flight Review. We'll see how that goes. But Sam says, that's it for me. Have a great one, Ray. As always, see you next time. Oh, and by the way, notice how smooth things have been going in the DCU without constant and inept studio interference. It's been so peaceful. Man, you were not kidding with respect to that. I'm going to tell you what, for those of us, and Sam, you understand as well as any of the rest of us, for those of us that have been, long suffering DC fans over the last decade or whatnot, yeah, just all of the chaos and all the difficulty and all of the misdirection and the aimlessness that the DCEU was just, replete with, and just, all manner of, Scooper Madness, getting the better of us here and stoking our emotions there, and no response from the studio and no PR and all that. No, it's very different. I mean, it's funny how there are different complaints now, and it's funny how basically the proliferation of DC studios, the rise of DC studios, has led to Scooper Madness losing their shit because they don't have the sources that they used to. And it's certainly, when it comes to Chattanooga, FBI himself, Jeff Snyder, publicly threatening James Gunn, like, oh, you're going to ruin things. Yeah, I can't wait to see David Zaslav's lawyers tear you a new asshole, buddy. Not that I'm a fan of David Zaslav by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, I any threats levied towards James Gunn, horrible idea, stupid idea, arrogant idea, right? But it's nice to see them twisting in the wind, and we, on the other hand, can be comfortable, if you will, right? Like, all of our discussion is about what we're seeing. It's not about the behind the scenes. I mean, really, the biggest behind the scenes thing that people are debating is the whole Batman situation, because you got the epic crime saga going on here with Reeves, and still wondering what's going to happen with the DCU version in, for James Gunn in that regard. That's the biggest thing. Other than that, what other strife and stress? We're not hearing about stuff on set. We're not hearing about, speculations. Oh, well, this rough cut is unwatchable, or this is that, or that's this. We're not hearing any of that shit, right? if anything, we're hearing more of that with Marvel, right? They're talking about people over on the Marvel side, like, is anybody on Avengers Doomsday? Did any of them read a script? Right? Like, was the script even finished? Like, how are they? And that's part of their whole assembly line process, right? But you're hearing way more production questions over there than you are over here. And not that we necessarily want to hear production questions over there either, because it's all noise and it's all silliness at the end of the day, regardless of which studio it is. But yeah, it's so much peaceful, so much more peaceful on the DC side now that DC Studios is in charge. I love it. Absolutely, I love it. And I love Gunn's presence. People say maybe, he's saying too much or he's responding to people he doesn't need to respond to. Yeah, I'm willing to take that with everything else getting answered, with there being a public face, with there being a actual PR, right? And not only that, getting the comic creators involved, seeing stuff from Tom Taylor and Mitch Gerads and others being posted about how, hey, this, and Jim Lee, like, hey, this is what's happening with this movie, this is what's happening with this show, stuff like that. Like, all of that, I love it. Like, their approach so far, as far as PR and marketing and controlling the narrative and just what they're doing with the slate so far, thoroughly enjoy it. It is so different. Very, very different and very, very refreshing to see. And glad that DC is in a position like this, truthfully, finally, after all those years of nonsense that we had to deal with. Nonsense that literally created the flight cast as it is in many ways, to be honest with you, 9 or so years ago. So, yeah, I'm with you on that, Sam. It has been very, very peaceful, and I enjoy it as well. So, thank you as always for your feedback. Indeed, greatly appreciated. All right, next up, Alex De Silva. His email this week, flight chat number 21. It's all objective. Okay, I feel like he's being antagonist with that particular title, but let's see how it goes. He says, hey, Ray, first some quick comments on topics covered in previous flight chats. I didn't catch that the background actors in Peacemaker were all white, and I'm a person of color myself. You are? Really? Has that come up before, Alex? I don't mean to, make light of that or whatnot, but I feel like we've never talked about that before, and I've definitely had many conversations with respect to representation matters, and I don't remember us talking about that before. That's intriguing. If I may ask, what is your ethnicity? I'm genuinely curious because I've talked about this with Wallyu and a number of others. I'm genuinely curious because I don't think this has ever come up before. Like, as far as you being a person of color, I'm very curious as to where that goes in that regard. So please let me know going forward in the next email, if you will. But he says, my mind just didn't even think to look for that. And if it did, I might have just assumed that it was a small country town where most residents are white. The interesting thing is that in real life, I've actually been in locations where I do a scan to see if there are any other POCs around. That curiosity factor just wasn't triggered in my brain for whatever reason. Yeah, and again, you know, I'm not saying that anybody, and I can't make this clear enough, that I'm not saying anybody that didn't catch it is a bad person, right? I'm not, raking anybody over the coals with it. But I do think that anybody that didn't catch it, that is something to evaluate, in my opinion, because I hear what you're saying, that you might have just assumed that it was a small country town where most residents are white. And my issue with that is that you're not allowed that excuse, or at least James Gunn, I should say, isn't allowed that excuse in a television series. In real life, especially if you know that you're headed into a small country town or through a small country town where most residents are white, okay, I get that. But in a show like this, in a television series, no, you can't make that assumption. Like, whenever, as the way that crews go now, the way that things are cast, the way that we know things operate in Hollywood, I think that there definitely has to be a, not a predilection, but there's definitely got to, your radar's got to be up as to whether or not a conscious choice is being made. And you got to hope that a conscious choice is being made. Because like I said to Jared earlier, I said, look, either he explains it in the actual show, which he did, like it was totally explained, or that's a question that James Gunn is going to have to answer afterwards, because why wouldn't you cast any brown extras, right? And we're not just talking about black people. We're talking about Latinos, we're talking about Asians, we're talking about all manner of brown people, because diversity is more than just black people in that regard, right? Diversity does extend to other races in that regard. So, like, to me, I do feel like that scan that you do in locations is also something that you should do when watching movies and television for similar reasons in that regard, because then that calls into question the production, that calls into question, the people that the director and anybody involved, the creatives, are working with, right? And that's just something, whether you feel that that's important or not, it's part of the world that we live in. It just is. And, it in a world where the idea is that this universe is supposed to be, Chris's perception is that it was the perfect universe. It was so much better than his universe. Well, it's definitely going to be on the radar for somebody like me. And I feel like it should be on all of our radars. Like, okay, he's considering it a perfect universe, but we're all the brown people, right? Like that can't be a coincidence. That can't be, especially with a character, historically speaking, that has been called a jingoist. Peacemaker, or rather, Judo Master called him a jingoist in this particular episode, and that's something that I've heard Phil Barker and a number and others call the Peacemaker character in real life. So when you think about that, it's like, okay, what is his design? What is his actual idea of what a better world is? Is it an all white world? Right? These are just things, something that's out there. And again, anybody that didn't notice it, I'm not calling them a bad person. I'm just saying that perhaps our radars should be up when we see something like that in the current climate that we live in the world that we live in, to be honest with you. So, yeah, not coming down on you or anything, just pointing it out and just expressing how I feel about it. But yeah, no, I'm definitely interested in the person of color in further conversations with respect to that, because I don't shy away from that. I talk about that on this show, and I've talked with Wally about it. I've talked with everybody about it. Like, I don't shy away from that, and because it's nothing to shy away from. It's something that it's a conversation that shouldn't be uncomfortable. There should be nothing uncomfortable about us talking about that, in these quarters, especially when it comes to representation matters, right? So yeah, I am curious, Alex. Let's get into that further, because that is not the impression I will tell you that I had with respect to our emails going forward. And I don't know if you brought this up before or whatnot, but yeah, that does. I'm not going to say it doesn't change things, because it does. Because now I'm intrigued, and I am curious with respect to your perspective as a person of color, especially given some of your fandom leanings as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that, man. I'm all for it. Let's have a great conversation on it. Let's get to the rest of your email though. You said next, every time I've used the home radio broadcast on Apple TV Plus, I've never experienced a hot mic in between innings. Whenever the broadcast goes to commercial, the radio plays its own commercials too. Really weird that they would just leave the announcers there without a break. So that leads me to believe, Alex, that perhaps it wasn't so much an Apple TV Plus issue and more a 97.1 the ticket issue. It might have been local. It might have been that there was nothing local for them to play, and perhaps that hot mic happened by accident, potentially. Or they gave them a different feed of audio, and that's not what they were supposed to give them. Potentially, that's what that was, right? Whatever it was lost in translation and miscommunication in terms of what I heard. And nothing illicit was said by Dan Dickerson or the broadcast team. Just, I could tell, yeah, this isn't over the air. Like, they're not talking over the air. They're like having a conversation, and it's like I'm sitting there the whole time, like, don't say anything off the cuff, guys. Don't say anything off color. Like, seriously, like, be careful, because somebody listening to this on Apple TV Plus will hear it if they're listening to the home broadcast, which I imagine a number of Tigers fans would be. In fact, I heard that I saw somebody post this yesterday. They were talking about how they were making a case that, for the divisional series, for the playoffs, that there still should be a case for there to be an opportunity to listen to hometown anchors while watching a game, because the problem is that you get into a national broadcast, and now you're dealing with a national team that doesn't understand all the nuances with respect to whatever your team is that you're watching, and so there's they're not going to understand the season or make references, and they don't have the full perspective. Like in our case, it's Jason Benetti and Andy Dirks. Jason Benetti, of course, is a national broadcaster. He does baseball and football nationally for Fox, right? And he does college and pro, right? And today, I think he did a football game. I think he was at the Jets game, if I'm not mistaken, earlier today, broadcasting that. But he is our local broadcaster on FanDuel Sports Network for the Tigers. And it would be great to hear his audio. It'd be great to hear him, because, obviously the Tigers are his team, the majority of the baseball season, right? Like, he is our broadcaster for that. And it would just be great to hear him, or, even if it was Dan Dickerson, who's been calling more TV games this year as well. when Benetti is out, because like they'll have Benetti go to like do a national game for someone, or it'll be on something other than Fox, if you will, right? Like if it, like the Apple TV broadcast is a perfect example. Now Dickerson was doing the radio broadcast, and that's the audio feed that they would get. But for Apple TV Plus, it wouldn't be Benetti. It would be their team, because FanDuel, I don't think, carries the Apple TV Plus games on Friday Night Baseball. So it would be somebody else. But yeah, anyone from a local broadcast, yeah, I see that argument. I understand people, missing the nuance that they normally get with their home team broadcast in the playoffs. So yeah, maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was a technical difficulty between Apple TV Plus and 97.1. Wouldn't surprise me, to be honest with you. All right, so I wasn't sure if you were going to bring this up, Alex, but you did, and I will give you props for this. You said, man, the Red Sox dropped the ball. Literally. Yep. The fact that we were eliminated by the Yankees of all teams makes it sting even more. I'm still traumatized by those last two wildcard games and don't want to say anything more on the subject at the moment. Good luck to your Tigers. Yeah, no, that was rough. And listen, you got to understand that baseball fans in general, we understand that even Jesus hates the Yankees. That's a T-shirt. Okay, that's printed on a T-shirt. You can buy that on a T-shirt, right? The Yankees are the evil empire. No one likes them but Yankees fans, right? So yeah, I wasn't rooting for the Yankees whatsoever, and I'm certainly not rooting for them now. I'm glad that Toronto firebombed them last night. Toronto's scary, but at least the Yankees lost, right? Like that's the plus in that. Thank you for the good luck. Like I was talking with Sam earlier. Sam's in Seattle, and they're a Mariners fan, so we're in competition, if you will. And the Tigers got a big Game 1 win last night. We'll see what happens with Scooble on the bump tonight for Game 2. It should be a win, but I never assume things. Never take teams for granted, take teams lightly or whatnot. Case in point here, just to interject a little bit more sports here. We got 7-0 Lions up on the Bengals, but the Bengals have already forced a fumble, and good Lord, the defensive line for the Bengals, appears to be giving the Lions offensive line some problems, unfortunately, if you will. So yeah, that's not good. It's a close one. It might end up being a lot closer game and a lot more uncomfortable for Lions fans at this point in time. And of course, it's not going to help us out as fans, because Trey Hendrickson, the defensive end for the Cincinnati, who requested a trade, held out for a little bit. We want him on our roster, but our brain trust, our general manager, has made it clear that they're not going to go out and get a high-priced defensive end to help Aiden Hutchinson. So yeah, now we have to deal with him giving us fits for now what has been a full quarter and now 3 more quarters, right? So just hopefully the Lions just survive in advance and get out of here. Philly already lost today, right? There's already been, like, on the NFL, any given Sunday, you just cannot assume that you're going to, roll over whoever you're going to win. Miami thought they were going to get a win today. Carolina came back and beat them. So you can't take anybody for granted in that regard, right? So yeah, here's hoping that's not the case with the Lions, and they just get out of here with a good win and don't get rid of the goodwill that they've built from that awesome win against Baltimore a couple of weeks ago when Lamar Jackson was still, on the field and whatnot. But yeah, either way, I hear you. He also said, thank goodness the Bruins and Celtics will be back soon. Yep, we got hockey and basketball season coming up. And, for me, like I mentioned earlier, it's whether or not the Red Wings can actually, make the playoffs in their centennial, or whether or not Steve Yzerman should probably be fired, because he just has not been much of a success whatsoever with respect to getting this team into the playoffs as general manager. And then the Pistons, right? We'll see how they can build upon being the 6th seed in the East last year and winning 44 games, which that was awesome. That was really awesome to see. So yeah, we are on the cusp of hockey and basketball season starting back up here pretty soon. So then Alex says, what are your thoughts on the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer? I really like the poster they released. The color scheme and busyness of the poster reminds me of a classic 1980s Indiana Jones poster. I'm fine with the trailer. I will say this is a big thing I want to talk about with respect to the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer, is I don't agree with the criticisms that it's not this epic trailer. And the reason I don't agree with that is because The Mandalorian and Grogu is a movie based off of a TV series. So obviously, production wise and whatnot, there's going to be similarities in that regard. And you're going to feel that way about The Mandalorian and Grogu because you watched 3 seasons of the TV series, right? And, if we're counting the 2 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, right? Add those as well into the mix with respect to the storyline, which, you can't just erase those from our memory, right? So I think that when people are talking about, well, Star Wars doesn't feel like it's epic anymore, it doesn't feel like a big, huge, grand event. Well, because it's not. It's not at this point in time. Now it's a TV franchise, to be honest with you. And I know you guys want the movies to come back, and I realize that Star Wars started on movies, and that, yes, we can get back to epic movie storytelling at some point, but that's not this movie. This is a movie literally like advancing a television series that we've been watching for the last number of years. So no, you're not going to feel the same way about this trailer or this movie that you did about any of the Skywalker saga films or even Rogue One or even Solo, because none of those movies were based off of a damn TV series. Imagine if you had seen the Rogue One trailer after watching Andor, both seasons. You'd feel the same way. You'd feel the exact same way. I'm not pointing at you, Alex. I'm just saying people that are complaining that this Mandalorian and Grogu trailer doesn't feel like epic, like epic event film to me, because it's not. It's not based off of that. It's based off of a TV series within the Star Wars universe. I don't realize why that's such a difficult thing. I think that fans, they want to get back to, they want the nostalgia, right? They want to get back to how they felt, with Star Wars movies beforehand. And it's like, well, the landscape has changed. Star Wars has been primarily a television franchise. In fact, it's been almost entirely a television franchise since the pandemic, right? Because The Mandalorian premiered, what, months before COVID-19 ravaged the planet, right? November of 2019, when Disney Plus was launching. And that's been the big sell. Since then, we've gotten that. We've gotten Ahsoka. We've gotten the Book of Boba Fett. We've gotten, Skeleton Crew. We've gotten Ahsoka, or the Acolyte, rather. Like, I mean, Star Wars has been a TV franchise for a minute now, guys. So, I mean, yeah, you just saw a trailer that is based off of a TV series that we've been watching. Yeah, it's going to look and feel differently than anything from the previous Star Wars movies that were not based off a TV series. So to me, I didn't have complaints about that. I don't. Did it look and feel like the TV show to me? Yes. I'm good. I'm good with that, truthfully. I'm with you on that. And I hear you in terms of like the color scheme and the busyness of the poster reminding of a classic 80s Indiana Jones poster. Yeah, they kind of started that, right? And there's been a complaint with a decent amount of people. Like, I've heard people complain about that with Marvel posters, how they don't like that. But that's where it started. The Indiana Jones posters, and even the Star Wars posters as well, right? The old Lucasfilm stuff. That's where that whole poster idea started. And yeah, they're harkening back. So what? Like, I'm good with it. I really don't have complaints and whatnot with it, to be honest with you. So I liked it, and I'm looking forward to the movie for sure. All right, so next, Alex has got a Scarathon update. He says, I watched some absolute classics for Scarathon. First up was John Carpenter's The Thing. Oh boy. Okay, here we go. He says, the monster in this is absolute nightmare fuel. Yeah, times 10. The practical effects look so good, so impressive, he says. Movies like this make me wish that today's movies made more of an effort to use practical effects, because this movie from the early 1980s looks so much better than half the stuff released today, if only there wasn't such an over-reliance on CGI nowadays. Yeah. So Rob Bottin, of course, was the creator of the creature effects for that film. That film is freaky. So freaky, and I've watched it. I've watched it multiple times. There was a time before, we're talking like in the 2000s, right? We're talking about the evolution of the internet earlier. I remember there was a website that I went on when I like discovered the thing, and I knew about it, but it was one of those where like I saw the poster, and the poster itself looked creepy enough with the the dude in the Eskimo suit, and you don't see his face because it's just all whited out, like whatever's there, right? And I'm like, what the hell is this movie? And it was done by the same guy who, John Carpenter did Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China, and it's like, okay, I've seen those movies. All right, so what's this about? And I remember reading the description about the movie, and I'm like, this sounds really, really freaky. And so one night, I decided to rent it from Blockbuster. Yeah, that's how long ago this was. I rented it from Blockbuster to finally get over my fear of it, if you will. And this was a fear of its perception, just from what I had read. And so I watched the movie, and yeah, that whole movie is nightmare fuel, man. The entirety of it, the concept, and just the way it was executed. Yes, I'm with you on those creature effects. Those creature effects were absolutely top notch, disgusting, crazy, scary, terrifying, nightmare fuel. Yeah, like horrible. Just And I hear you. You know, if only there wasn't such an over reliance on CGI nowadays. It depends on the filmmaker. It really does. Because I feel like somebody like James Gunn probably would do a version of this film with more practical effects. And I think there are plenty of filmmakers that most certainly would do a film like The Thing with more practical effects. So I don't want to make it seem like this type of thing is just not possible these days. I feel like there are filmmakers that most certainly would do this. Hey, quite frankly, I'm hoping that we get some practical effects like this for Clayface, truthfully, because that's supposed to be a lower budget horror film based off of a Mike Flanagan script. Go ahead, go with practical effects. Give us some looks of Matt Hagen and the Clayface, effect and whatnot that definitely creep us the hell out, like this thing does in The Thing. I feel like there should be some similarities, if you will, especially with what The Thing does in this movie compared to, what we know Clayface does in DC lore, if you will. So yeah, I feel like that's a good barometer in that regard. But yeah, no, I'm with you. It's a really unsettling movie. It's so unsettling that I'm still questioning whether or not I'm going to make it part of my library. And it's not that I don't have horror movies in my library. I got more than a few. I got Event Horizon, which is infinitely more terrifying and scarier, and that uses practical effects. Right, that absolutely uses some very scary, gory practical effects. I have all four of the theatrically released Hellraiser films, Hellraiser Quartet of Torment. Right, I've got that. Like, I'm not averse to having horror movies in my library anymore. I used to be, but not anymore. And yeah, I'm still contemplating that one. I don't know yet. I'm thinking about it. But yeah, Nightmare Fuel to the hilt. Absolutely, that film is very well done in terms of the paranoia, in terms of the acting, in terms of the direction. But yeah, whew, I don't know. I'm going to think about that one. But then he says, next up, I watched 1968's Night of the Living Dead. While this wasn't the first ever zombie movie, it revolutionized the zombie genre and established a lot of the rules that later zombie stories would follow. For example, this movie established that you have to destroy the brain to permanently take a zombie out, and it established the zombies as slow, shambling shufflers. I also found it interesting, he says, that the star of the movie is a black man, which is notable considering its release year. Dwayne Jones plays Ben, a capable, resourceful leader who all the other white characters quickly rally behind and take orders from. I obviously wasn't around in 1968, but knowing what we know about U.S. history, such a concept at the time seems almost downright radical. Director George Romero apparently stated that Jones's race had nothing to do with his casting. He was cast simply because he was the best actor for the job, which is how it should be. Yes, Alex, it is how it should be, but we all know that's not how it is, even to this day, even in 2025. In fact, maybe even especially now in 2025, that's not how it is, right? Because we have this sentiment that suggests otherwise, right? The anti DEI and anti wokeness and all that other nonsense bullshit and whatnot. But either way, not to get heavily political about it, yeah, it should be in an equal world, in a world that actually has where true equality has been achieved. Most certainly, that's how it should be. But we ain't there yet, and we haven't been there like ever in life. Truthfully, like not true equality, not with respect to industry, not with respect to corporates, corporate structure and whatnot. We are not there yet. And I don't know how much longer we'll be there. I don't know how much. I don't know if we'll see true equality in our lifetimes, Alex. I'll put it to you that way, to be honest with you. But yeah, I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead. I do remember that in Dawn of the Dead, the original Dawn of the Dead, I do remember that there was a black actor, and I'm going to look his name up here real quick. The 1978, because the brief story that talked about that, Ken Foree, that was his name. He played the character Peter. Um, in that movie, like the week that the Zack Snyder James Gunn version came out, the one that Snyder directed and James Gunn wrote, uh, that particular week, my buddy Brian, he showed me the original earlier that week, the 1978 version, and then we went to go the Palladium to see the 2004 version, the Zack Snyder James Gunn version, right? And note the similarities and differences and all that shit and whatnot, right? There is a lead character, and I don't know that he's the lead, but he's definitely part of the group of survivors, if you will. Black man, played by Ken Foree. His name in the movie is Peter, and he's the one that is, characterized as having the quote, "When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth." Right, and Ken Foree's been in a number of other things, but I think that's like probably the biggest thing that he's been in, and so I wouldn't say that he was the lead of the film, but he was definitely like, I think he lived. I think he subverted the trope of the black people dying early and lived in that film. I think it's been a while since I've seen it. I think he lived in that movie. I don't entirely remember exactly. I feel like I could click on the synopsis for Dawn of the Dead real quick and see that if I can here. Let me scroll through this real quickly here. Yes, spoilers, I guess, for a 1978 film. He does live. He does live. It's the other dude, Roger, that does not live. So yeah, no, that's cool. Thank you for bringing that up. Like I said, I've never seen the original Night of the Living Dead. I don't know that I've seen like any version of Night of the Living Dead, but I certainly haven't seen the 1968 version. But yeah, and I am definitely more of a fan of the slow shambling shufflers. You know, not the track meet zombies that we see in Dawn of the Dead and Zombieland, and because the the slow shambling shufflers, like that's more of the commentary on society that zombies actually are supposed to represent from what I've read, as opposed to the track stars that will kill you and basically your only way out is suicide in that regard. So yeah, intriguing. All right, so The Thing and Night of the Living Dead, the original Night of the Living Dead. All right, those are two good companions for Scarathon. He says, I also rewatched Mission Impossible Fallout, and this movie continues the trend of these movies just getting better and better from the second movie onward. Solomon Lane continues to make for a good villain, and it was interesting to get a villain that carries over from one movie to the next, since it was the first time this series did that. Yeah, in many ways, it kind of reminded me of what the Bond movies did from Casino Royale to Quantum of Solace, only this is better, right? And I like Quantum of Solace, but obviously Casino Royale was superior in my opinion, subjectively, and certainly Skyfall was better than that afterwards as well. But yeah, like direct sequel territory, the fact that they carried over the Solomon Lane thing, that was cool. I did like that. He says, as for stunts, this movie had two big ones. First was the Halo jump. Cruise, Henry Cavill stuntman, and the cameraman are actually plummeting to the earth from 25,000 feet in the air. And then there's all the stuff with the helicopter at the end. Cruise actually learned how to pilot a helicopter for this role and did all the actual flying that you see in the movie, including an incredibly dangerous corkscrew spin out. This guy is just insane, a true maniac. I swear he's missing the standard human fear factor for survival. He does it for the audience. He said this before. He does it for the audience, right? And it's all in service to the realism and to make it more incredible for the audience. And you know what? That's just how he's wired. That's just what he does. And if he's willing to sign his life away, I never want to. We don't want that headline. However you feel about Tom Cruise and his personal life or whatever, we never want to see the headline of he one of these stunts went the wrong way. We don't want that. We absolutely don't want that. So if he can do all the safety precautions and whatnot, look, his death defying nature, like he can do it for as long as hopefully he survives all of it, right? Like that's not how we want to see Tom Cruise taken out. Not at all. Most certainly not. I don't ever want to see that happen. But man, tell you, it is scary. And think about that. That was the sixth movie. Fallout was the sixth movie. Think about everything he did. Think about the motorcycle jump that he does in Dead Reckoning. And then think about the airplane sequence and the submarine sequence that he does in Final Reckoning. He's insane. He is a true maniac. You're absolutely right. So next up, Alex says, a lot of people tend to get upset when shows' weekly episodes are released and they have a short runtime. I used to be one of those people, he says, until I found a very simple solution. I stopped looking at the runtimes. It's that simple. I just sit down and watch the episode without any preconceived notion of how fast it might fly by. Episode 6 of Peacemaker is about 36 minutes long, and episode 7 is 33 minutes, which is pretty short, relatively speaking. But the episode sure didn't feel that short when I was watching, because I wasn't thinking about the runtime while watching. I was just focused on the story. The standout moment from episode 7 for me was the scream from Cena when he yells, "Stop." Raw, guttural emotion, like he was transported back to being a little kid who doesn't want to see anything bad happen to his brother. Some really great acting in that moment. Yeah, they called that the caterwaul. Alex, I talked about that in my Flightbox review of that episode. And yeah, I'm with you as far as the runtime deal. Don't look at the clock. The only time that we really should look at the clock, and I realize that people are going to tell you, well, we have no choice. When we start at the episode, it's there in the lower corner. Yeah, well, you could not look at that lower corner. You could. If you really wanted to, like separate yourself from that. But no, you look at that because a lot of times you're thinking, well, how much time have I got to watch this episode? Because maybe you've got other stuff in your schedule and you've only got a certain block of time. Okay, that's your business, right? But yeah, I do feel like a good amount of the complaints do come from people that focus so much on the runtime and don't watch the episode for what it is. Because no, I don't think either episode 6 or 7 feel as long as they actually are. I think they certainly are not as fast as they actually are, right? Like neither one of these episodes seem like they run by fast to me at all. I feel like the pacing and what happens and the character development definitely makes them feel longer than just over a half hour in both cases, to be honest with you. And that's without credits, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I hear you. If people didn't focus so much on the number, I don't think we'd have that many runtime complaints at all. I feel like it's got to be more about the story than about the length, right? People get so hung up on minute details. And again, it's the CinemaSins generation. Seriously, I effing hate CinemaSins. It's just absolutely horrible how that has poisoned the conversation and how it really has taken a lot of the subjective nature and the enjoyment out of the art form that we're supposed to be witnessing, as opposed to, nitpicking every little damn thing with respect to runtime, with respect to whether they did this, whether they expounded upon that, whether this made sense, whether that made sense. It's all ridiculous, and people just don't know how to enjoy shit anymore. Either way, it is what it is. I'm glad that I'm glad that you came to that realization with respect to runtime, Alex, because I completely 100% agree with you. All right, let's get to your TNG update, because you said this time for the Next Generation you watched Devil's Due. Yeah, what did you think about Devil's Due, Alex? Well, he said the arbitration was the standout sequence of the episode. The show has done the whole courtroom thing a few times now, and it's always enjoyable. Data makes for the perfect judge, since he evaluates all presented evidence for what they are and draws his own conclusions without preconceived thoughts and feelings getting in the way. With him, we can actually say it's all objective. Okay, all right. I wasn't sure where you were going with the title, but now I get it. Okay, in that regard, yes. And that's because Data doesn't have emotion. Data does not have emotion. And I realize that arguments can be, posited one way or the other with respect to him having emotion. But at this point in his development, he does not have emotion. So, yeah, he does look at it dispassionately. He does look at it objectively. He is the perfect arbiter, the perfect judge in that particular scenario. And that's why they choose him in that regard, because he is definitely objective in that sense. He only looks at the facts. He does not have preconceived notions, regardless of, the fact that he's part of the Enterprise crew, regardless of the his curiosity and whatever else goes into his relationships with the Enterprise crew. He is objective when it comes to judging the case. So yes, I'm with you on that. That is the one time that we actually can say it's all objective for him, for sure. He said it was satisfying to see Ardra get her comeuppance. As antagonistic as she was, you've got to admire her spunk. She truly shot her shot. She did. She absolutely did. But yeah, she was just a simple con artist at the end of the day. And yeah, when they completely turned the tables on her in that last act of the episode, yeah, that was very satisfying. Definitely agree with that. He says next episode is called Clues, Live Long and Prosper. Alex, Clues is a good one. Clues is a real good one. I'm real curious to hear what you feel about Clues, because that's a real good one. I think that's definitely one of the bigger gems of season 4 for sure. And I wonder if you have any questions with respect to what could potentially come from that episode after you see it. But we'll see, good sir. But until then, thank you as always for your feedback, Alex. It is indeed greatly appreciated. And finally, we'll close out this week's episode of Flight Chat with an email from Jared Cardos titled, "How did I miss that?" Yeah, I think we know what he's talking about there. He says, "Hey Ray, hope you're doing well. Not a lot else going on, so I'm just going to give some thoughts on this big in moments episode of Peacemaker. For being one of the shorter episodes, this really packed a punch," he says, "or maybe a bunch of sharp stabs about the neck and chest, which happened quite a bit in this episode. Yeah, especially the real heartbreaking one towards the end for sure." He says, "First, I have to appreciate that after figuring out what's going on, Chris doesn't try to justify or say anything good about this world. He tries to justify why it took him this freaking long to notice. But once he knows he's on Nazi world, he wants out just as bad as everyone else." Yeah, that was cool. Because he had been arguing that with Harcourt initially, and then as soon as that was made clear to him, he's like, "Nope, we're leaving. That's it. We're out." That is a deal breaker for him. It's no longer a question of whether or not he's going to leave, he has to leave. He's out at this point. So I appreciate that as well. Jared says, I do wonder if that mural of Hitler was ever really fuzzy in the background of previous episodes. I know that people have scrubbed through previous episodes and found all the books of Mein Kampf on the desks, but not close enough to read them, so it's not entirely impossible. Yeah, there's a part of me, I'm 50-50 on that, Jared, because I've railed a decent amount against cinema sins in this particular episode, and I do despise cinema sins. And to me, that's something that CinemaSins would do, is it would go through and they would count like all of the like that's what that type of thought process does. That's what the type of operation does, where it's like you freeze frame, you rewind, and you go through and you're like, little count this and see where that camera angle was and all that, right? And so there's a part of me that's like, screw it. It achieved the desired effect where we didn't see it when we first watched the episode. So the idea that, oh, we saw it later, that's not fair, because it didn't impact like how insightful and like how much of a twist that was when we saw it in episode 6. But by the same token, there is that curiosity. I am curious, just like you are, whether or not that mural was out of focus. So there is a part of me that does want to see if that is the case, in addition to the Mein Kampf copies being, all over everybody's desk, but not in focus, right? Like, just how, how well did they put it in front of our faces? How well did they hide it in plain sight for us, without, just maybe it was always the camera, like the mural, the Hitler mural was always to the back of the camera, right? Or it was always just slightly out of focus so that you couldn't see it because it was a close up on Chris or a close up on Thirst Court or somebody else like that, right? That would be cool from a production standpoint to just see that in that regard, right? I hear you. He says, I also really love the whole dynamic between Adebayo and Judo Master in this episode. It was fun watching them bounce around in dialogue, and between that and Judo Master vouching for Chris at the end of the episode, I can definitely see him being one of the 11th Street kids by the end of this season. It definitely puts a mirror to our world in a rather uncomfortable way. I mean, it's not that long ago that there was the story of a black man jogging through a street where a couple of good old boys tried to run him down with their truck, and it's far from the only time it's ever happened. Jared, there was just a story weeks ago about a black kid, 21 years old, early 20s, found hung from a tree, and police trying to claim that it was suicide, that he took his own life. But too many bruises and too many injuries to the body suggest otherwise, right? You don't beat the shit out of yourself before hanging yourself from a tree, especially, in southern parts of the country, and whatnot. So yeah, unfortunately, it's still very much the reality that we're dealing with right now. So yeah, Adebayo's entire line about how, that world, that Nazi world, that Earth X, not as dissimilar from the real world as we would like it to be, and Judo Master agreeing. It's like, yep, these are two brown people. And I also really like the juxtaposition, black woman and, Asian male, basically, having that conversation and coming to the agreement that, yeah, no, this is, our world is better than this one, but not by as much as we wish it was. Yes, absolutely. Remember, Augie 1 still existed on that Earth. Augie 1 was still a racist KKK son of a bitch, the white dragon in that Earth. So, yeah, for sure. I hear you on that one. As for Augie and whether we really believe about him being a Nazi, Jared says, I think we don't really get enough of a wide view of this Earth to really get a grasp on it. We don't know if there are any metas like there are in Chris's world, how advanced they are, what the rest of the world is like. The most we can really say is that Augie talks a good game and really wants our Chris and the rest of the gang to go to their home dimension. Partly, I think, because they don't want their Nazi world to know about their dimensional portal, which is pretty understandable, especially if they don't have access to that kind of technology. Yeah, because however Augie 2 and Keith got it, they certainly don't want the rest of Nazi Earth or Nazi United States in this regard to know about it, right? To actually take possession of it, right? Which is, we may be seeing a different version of that. Obviously Argus is not the Nazis, but now they're in possession of the portal on like the main Earth, right? And so that could be an issue, right? Not for the same reasons, but for similar, not for the exact same reasons, but hey, do we really need Argus to be in control of the portal? That may end up being a terrible idea, especially, considering whatever deal Rick Flag Sr. made with Lex that, Happerson, I think, kind of indirectly knows about as well. So yeah, I hear you on that. And yeah, I think as far as any extrapolations on Augie 2 and like how much of a non-Nazi he was, yeah, we see enough to know that at the very least he had some other agenda that wasn't Nazi like. He didn't like being called a Nazi. He did feel guilt for not being able to do what he could as far as fighting against it. And, whether you feel that, whether people feel that he should have become a member of the Sons of Liberty or not, like the other vigilante did, he at least wanted to help the 11th Street kids get back to their dimension, including Adebayo, right? Like, didn't want any harm to come of her, right? And somebody also brought up, somebody mentioned on Threads, and I didn't bring this up, about his behavior with the police and how standoffish he was with them, and about how, you can't come in my house, my son isn't here, that type of deal, which he wasn't lying. His son wasn't there, technically. But, just the resistance that he provided, that whole sequence, that whole scene, just also gives you the idea that Augie is used to flipping the police off, and he doesn't agree with the police, but they can't necessarily do anything to him because he's a beloved hero and he's a white man. So they have to go through the regular channels like maybe they've done before in that regard, right? So that also, I think, served to give a little bit more support to the idea of Augie not being a Nazi. But yeah, we don't have quite as much information to fully make determinations about him in that regard. We only have what we know, what we were seeing, what we were shown rather in this episode. And everything that we were shown indicates that he was at least not in agreement with the Nazi principles of his world in that regard. But Jared says, but the big thing about this episode is how they do get Chris out in the worst way possible. I agree that Cena should at least get an Emmy nomination, if not just for that scene. And I'm really curious to see if Keith is being set up for the next episode, maybe breaking out and finding Chris's world while Argus is exploring these dimensions, or if he's being set up for something else down the line. Hopefully, it will be for the next season of Peacemaker or something close to it. And I hope James Gunn is just playing it close to the chest, and this is far from the last time we see Cena as Peacemaker. Yeah, but I will say, and Jared, I don't know if you, I'm guessing you listen to Flightbox, but there are people out there speculating that based on Chris's temperament right now, this could be it for him. I don't know that it will be. I'm not sure that that's a door that James Gunn wishes to close, but it wouldn't surprise me. We'll see how it goes. We'll see exactly how this season finale turns out, and and people are kind of speculating and extrapolating upon this because of the statement that Gunn made about how it may not necessarily be Peacemaker season 3 because it's not necessarily in development at the moment, right? But you could see the characters elsewhere in the future of the DCU for sure. So we'll see. We've got later this week to see what happens on that season finale. He says, as for the talk of cameos and all that, I agree that seeing some big characters in that Earth didn't make much sense for the story because that's not really what the story is about. That said, I think considering that we're about to see a bunch of other alternate worlds, I wouldn't be surprised if something shows up there. I could also see at the very least another appearance from Guy, Kendra, and Maxwell Lord. Maybe Chris does something to help save the day and they offer him a position in the Justice Gang. It might be a big ask, but I would also love to see Superman show up and give Peacemaker a pep talk, but whatever happens, I'm definitely excited to see where this last episode goes. And that'll do it for me. Looking forward to your future episodes, especially this secret thing that you're hinting at until then. Jared, thank you as always for your feedback. With respect to the cameos, yeah, and again, I am not disappointed that we didn't get like the massive cameos or whatever people were speculating we would get to this point. There's absolutely still a potential, since this final episode, this last season finale is going to be the episode where they actually open the doors and go to all the other dimensions or whatnot. Yeah, there's quite a few things we can see. I think that what the scenario you brought up here in terms of another appearance from Guy, Kendra, and Maxwell Lord, oh, that's very possible. That's extremely possible, especially given the production schedule of Superman with Peacemaker season 2. Yeah, absolutely, we could see them again. I that would not surprise me one bit if we see them again, not expecting it, but it most certainly could happen. And the very well situation that you're talking about, in terms of he does something to help save the day and they offer him a position in the Justice Gang, recanting what they said in episode 1. Absolutely. Most certainly that could happen. The Superman thing, again, Gunn publicly says that it didn't work out. It didn't fit. And I'm still inclined to believe that if we don't see Corn Sweat Superman in the season finale, that they filmed something for him and Gunn decided it didn't work and they cut it out later. And that's what Corn Sweat is really bummed out about. That's what I tend to believe occurred. But we'll see what happens. My Dark Horse cameo is still out there. I've mentioned it before. And now with less than a week to go, I'm not going to say it out loud, but I've mentioned it before. If it happens, hoorah. If not, not a big deal. Not really. Like, I'm not going to be like pounding the pavement upset. Like, I can't believe you didn't do that. No, it's going to be fine. This season has been phenomenal. I don't know in terms of, I would say in terms of character development and personal stories, it definitely is a deeper season than season one was, right? If we're talking about overarching like secret invasion type stuff, like that post that I had, I found the guy yesterday saying that the post on Threads saying that Peacemaker uh, out secret invasion Marvel's secret invasion. And it's like, well, yeah, actually, that's quite true. Peacemaker did do a secret invasion type season one, that is, did do a secret invasion type storyline, quite superior to what Secret Invasion actually was in the MCU, even though I still didn't hate Secret Invasion in the MCU. But either way, I will have to look at it when it's all said and done in terms of like which season we think is better, right? If we want to have that conversation, even, I mean, we don't have to have that conversation, but how people love to compare shit and whatnot. So yeah, we can look at it then once the season finale is done and over with. But yeah, so far it's been great so far through the 7 episodes. I like the pacing, like the character development, and yeah, looking forward to see exactly where this last episode goes for sure. And then as far as my future episodes, yeah, the secret thing that I'm hinting at, the thing that, because I said last week on Threads that I was taking some time off for the rest of the week because there is another thing that I am developing. Yeah, it's really just it's a number of things that I've wanted to do with the flight cast that I've had an idea for that I have just kind of sat on and kind of procrastinated through, and I am bringing those to the forefront finally because no time like the present, and why be afraid of new ideas and shit that you want to do with your own website. So yeah, stay tuned for that, Jared. More on that to come. There's like a lot of I's to dot and a lot of T's to cross, but that's what I got to do, and that's what I got to work on with respect to that. So yeah, just bear that in mind in the not too distant future. Stay tuned is the best thing that I can tell you with respect to that. But until then, until next time, thank you for your feedback, Jared. It is indeed greatly appreciated as always. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Flight Chat. Thank you to everyone that sent in feedback this week. Thank you to John R. for his emails. Thank you to Stu Little. Thank you to Wally U. Thank you to Sam Freeman. Thank you to Alex De Silva. And thank you to Jared Cardos. Thank you to everyone that sent in emails and feedback this week. All greatly appreciated. Looking forward to further discussion on Peacemaker, especially after that season finale, among other things as well that you guys love to talk about with movies, TV, and other assorted media. If you listen to this show and you want to join the feedback circle along with all the other individuals that joined this particular week, you know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at The FlightCast, on BlueSky at FlightCast. You can comment on the posting for this particular episode on the FlightCast YouTube channel, youtube.com/TheFlightCast. There's also the FlightCast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, have a great week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.